Hello everyone, I hope you're all well and safe. Today I've been convinced to make a video about the Zibo 737. What I mean convinced is that I'm aware that there's plenty of material about the Zibo, there's tons of it, and especially very professional one thanks to Flight Deck to Sim and the likes, and especially Flight Deck to Sim. But I thought it would be just fun to do it and have a quick look. It will be a relatively long video with a full flight, so instead of doing many different videos about different parts of the configuration and flight, I'll just do one and then put timestamps, and you can skip wherever you like. This is sort of aimed at very beginner pilots, people who have just downloaded the Zibo, the 737, and want to start using it. It's a fairly complicated aircraft, as we've seen on our Discord, where we all mainly fly the Airbus. So sometimes moving from an Airbus or a simpler airplane to the Zibo, or from GA to the Zibo, is quite complicated. There's quite a lot of workload. I have a bit of experience in the last couple of years using the Zibo. In the last few weeks I've flown it a lot and learned a lot about the flows and the checklist and the procedures, because I did a full simulator experience with the Ryanair pilot, and that gave me a lot of insight in the plane. Now let's step into it, and let's start with the basic the tablet in the Zibo, which is quite complicated. There's a lot to learn about the tablet. So this first part will be about the tablet, and you can skip it, of course, if you have already a configured Zibo, and you can skip to the cold and dark part of the video. I just wanted to introduce the tablet here. So this is it's basically Avitab, which is a free add-on for X-Plane 11, and embedded into this proprietary tablet for Zibo that lets you handle a lot of things. So you have a PA system over here where you can make announcements, or PA announcements in the cabin. As a captain, it's fantastic. You have a lot of different airlines. Ryanair. As you can see, Ryanair, TUI Fly, and you can change it wherever you want. You have all the American ones and etc. So for today, we'll keep, I don't know, Ryanair is not my favorite one, but for the sake of well, consistency with delivery, we'll keep Ryanair. You then have start service cruise on ground and start flight legs. These are, you use them on a daily basis. When you start a cold and dark, you'll have the start service cruise on ground, and you just hear the noise of clattering and hoovers and people cleaning the cabin, and then you can start the flight leg, and you have passengers coming on board and the chat and etc. Fuel weight and balance, we'll see them once we start. Checklists, I wouldn't use this one personally. If you wanted a checklist, I would use X checklist, which is again a freeware add-on, and the Zibo actually comes already with a file for X checklist. It's really complete. It guides you through every single switch and step of a complete flight. Now the one that comes basic is a bit sometimes too much. Like you have a walk around, an exterior walk around, that I'm not quite sure how many people do in flight sim, because there's really no point in doing an exterior walk around in a sim, and you have different phases that are a bit confused. So I've personally amended it a little bit, but it's a very good beginning. You have ground services as well to set chocks. You have your GPUs. You can open and close all the doors, cabin lighting, and so forth and so on. And then of course you can access your Avitab. You can access the charts and so forth and so on. I have it bound with a keyboard key, so I have it here on the side. I prefer to just use the tablet for Zibo here and use the Avitab in a separate window. And then very important, you have the options. So when you go here, you have this little arrow on the right hand side. You click and you go in the options. Have a play yourself with the options. There's quite a lot of things to play with. Some things that I might want to point out in display and variants in the second page 2 out of 5, and make sure you have LEDs. They're a lot brighter than halogen lights, especially with X-Plane. The lighting is not really great at night in airports, so it's better to have the LEDs. And then you can put the HUD for the captain. So this for low visibility landings is absolutely fantastic. So I would suggest to keep it. Other quick things that you might want to have a look at, very important the first time you start flying. If you go into hardware, that depends on what setting you're using, if you're using pedals or if you're using a joystick. If you're using a joystick, a twist joystick like me, it's good that you put the nose wheel axis to yaw, so you can actually steer when you start taxiing. For the rest, the last one into general config here, kilos or pounds, depends on where you're based, and then the same for the baro units. And lastly, you can set this on to baro, so by default it will be switched to baro, which is what we use most of the time. And the last one is you can decide the when you start up X-plane with engines not running, you can decide whether it's in a cold and dark state like this, or a turnaround if you want to do a slightly quicker flight. And it's quite handy that, because the cold and dark is quite long here. And that the last one is here on the second page here, the synchronization of the QNH minimum or the standby baro. Now, if you don't synchronize it, you need to set the QNH on pilot, first officer, and the standby. Every time you need to change the QNH, you need to change 3 of them. You can switch it to captain, and whatever you do onto the captain side, it will be reproduced on the other 2, so you don't need to do that. Or if you're flying on the right hand side, you can put first officer. I put off, sometimes I put automatic, and normally I come back to off because it's a bit more realistic. When you set the altimeters, you need to cross-check them. So it adds a little bit more immersion if you leave them off. Whatever you do, then you make sure you go back to home, and then you do save and load configuration and quick save all config. Otherwise it will revert back to normal. That's pretty much what there is to know about the tablet. Of course, feel free to explore yourself. Now, need to start with a cold and dark. Now, I take, you have a Delta, I believe that might be available on Zibo hard drive, a FCOM, so a full manual of the plane by Delta Airlines. Being Europe-based, I tend to use more Ryanair, and I would suggest if you go through a normal procedure SOP, that you do choose an operator and stick to that, because it can get quite confusing. I mean, the way to do flows and to do all the actions that you need to do to get the airplane ready can vary quite substantially sometimes between airlines. So it is important that you stick to one procedure. There's none better than another. They all fly the plane, they are fully proficient. It's just the order in which they do things. So personally, I'm using Ryanair, which might differ from other things that you see, but that's it, just choose one. Ryanair is quite easy to get as well. I got it by registering, subscribing to Ryanair, virtual Ryanair, and then you have all the material there. Now, the way it works on a 737, you need to do flows, so you will not have any written checklist to do the vast majority of actions. You need to memorize them, and they call them flows because they flow in certain directions, and they designed to be as simple to memorize as possible. Now let's start powering up the aircraft. So we're in a cold and dark 737. First thing we do over here, we check that we're good to go. Now, 2 important things to do before we start anything. We just check that the landing gear is down and the electrical hydraulics pumps, these 2 in the middle, are off. So we can do the first step, which is the battery here. You find the overhead over here. You click down the cover and it turns the battery automatically on. So as we said, we need to check that these 2 pumps, electric hydraulic pumps, are off. The 2 external ones are the engine hydraulic pumps, so they won't be running now because the engines are off. But the electric ones, as soon as you put some sort of power, they will come on and they can move surfaces like the flaps outside or doors and etc. So we need to make sure that they're off until the ground personnel knows that we're here. The other one is the landing gear is down, and we have 3 green lights here, and you have 3 green lights here at the top. So having done that, we need to get ground power. We could either start APU if we didn't have ground power, but we're in a sim, so we can always have ground power. So what we do, we go into the tablet over here, and we do ground services, GPU connect. At this point, you see this is the ground power switch. It's blue, so that's available. So we click that down, and we have power, and you can hear the fans coming up. All the screens are powering up. The very first thing we do, we need to do a fire test, making sure that our fire system, fire protection system is on and functioning. So we come on the center pedestal here, and you have this little switch here. So fold in hot test, click it to the left, you have these 2 lights coming on, and we're good. And you had as well the caution here. Then we switch it to the right, and you have the fire bells going off. So you can see the 3 lights here, you can see it's going off here, and you have the yellow and the red light. Then you let that go, and we check now the fire extinguishers. So 2 circuits, 1 and 2, switch it one side, check the 3 lights are on, switch it to the other side, and the other 3 lights are on. Then we go back to the overhead panel, and at this point we put the nav light on. So the nav light is over here, position, strobe and steady. So steady below is a simple nav light, and on top you have the strobe lights. So the nav lights will click it by clicking down, and the navigation lights will be these lights. So the green one on this side, the red one on this side, and then you have a white one at the back. This one is simply now indicating that there is electrical power to the airplane. Things might be moving, and the ground crew knows that there is someone doing stuff inside. As simple as that. Then we close the cover of the emergency exit light, so the light goes off. This is very much like many other planes. The lights on the overhead panel, they need to be ideally all off. If there is a red light, it means there's something that needs to be done. So you see, I closed the emergency light, and this one went off. Then we can test the attend button, which is the one that sounds in the cabin for the crew members, and then the ground call, which is the one which we call the ground personnel. That works, and we're all good. At this point we can do some checks. Here we check that the flaps are up and the flap lever is up. It always be, it's a simulation, so it's never going to be in any other place, but it's good sometimes as well when you do turn around and you don't do a complete cold and dark. You check that the speed brake is stowed, is up in the up position. Check that the thrust lever are down. You can advance them to try the takeoff configuration warning, which means that if you put them up, you can hear the takeoff config and you see the red light there. This tells you that the airplane is not configured for takeoff correctly. It can be the trim completely out of range, it can be the parking brake, it can be the flaps not set up, it can be the spoiler armed. There's different things that trigger it. We want to hear it now because we're clearly not ready to go. Then we put them back off, we check that the parking brake is on, that the starter valve, so this is the fuel injection, they're cut off, so there's no possibility of fuel going anywhere, and the stop trim cutout switches are normal. So this is a switch that you could switch off. I don't know if you would ever need it in a sim, to make sure that the automatic step trim with the autopilot doesn't work. Make sure that they're always up normal, and that's it. The next step, we do a cargo fire test, this little button over here. So we press it, and again we have another fire test with all the lights and the fire warning there, and we're good. While you're here, you can set the lights of the panels. I always turn them on day or night. Just put this one bright, and this is the backlighting of all the writings over here. And then you can turn this one as well, backlighting, or the flood, which is just the light. That you'll be using it more in the evening, but I always turn it on anyway. At this point, we continue the flow. So I spoke about flow. Try memorize that flows are really, especially on the 737, flows are really important. So you've seen we've done the emergency light, then these two, then we did the flaps, then we came down, we did everything that there was here, and then we did the cargo fire test that we didn't do earlier. Nothing to be done here at the moment. We come down here on the right. So this is the manual gear extension door. You could extend manually the gear. We need to make sure that the door is closed, otherwise the gear won't work. Then we turn here, we check that all the circuit breakers are off. They don't work, they're not modeled, so they'll never be in any other position, but it's just for a bit of immersion. And then we come up on the very top of the overhead panel. Over here, again, all the lights need to be off. All these lights, they need to be off, apart from the 3 green gear down lights. The 2 EEC, they need to be on, and the flight recorder is off at the moment. We'll test it. So first thing we do, we open this cover, we switch the little switch inside, and we check that it goes off, and then we close back the cover. Then we do a Mach airspeed warning test. So this is the overspeed warning. We check that it goes off. And normally by this point is not long enough for the stall warning test to have been powered up. It needs 4 minutes of after you put the power on, it needs 4 minutes to charge. Now we're speaking quite a lot, so it does work. You can see the column shakes, and then you try number 2, and the column shakes. So this is just a stall warning test, and that is okay. Then we check that we have enough crew oxygen. Normally it's always there at 12.5, and we have it. And then we do the very important IRS. IRS is the positioning system of the airplane. Of course, you have it in all airplanes with GPS navigation capabilities. So you need to turn these knobs onto nav. It will first go on DC, and then it will illuminate align on both of them. Once it's white align, you're good to go. You can also turn the base of this knob, not the top, the base of this knob to heading, and it will tell you how many minutes to align, and that's 7 minutes. So before those 7 minutes have elapsed, you're not gonna have information here on the PFD and then the NT, because the plane doesn't know where it is in terms of navigation, and it doesn't know which way is sitting. So it doesn't know if it's vertical, where it's looking at, and etc. So it needs to do the alignment before you can see anything on these 2 screens, and then we'll see them coming up in a few minutes. Then after you finish this, you've done everything you needed to do on top. If you want, you can do a test of the flaps. Again, simulation is never not going to work, but you can add that. Then you check the other circuit breaker panel, and then you can take a seat at this point. In terms of views, I would strongly recommend to set up a view like this of the overhead panel, because that's how it is done in reality. It's done while you're standing in between the 2 seats. Then the view, just set it yourself. Some people like to be further away, some people like to be zoomed in. For me, as long as I can see everything, including the altitude, and I can at least adjust the altitude without moving the view, it's good. Then I would suggest to do a view looking at the whole NCP panel over here when you need to really fiddle with this one, so you have a quick way of doing it. Then a look at the thrust levers and all these things over here when you need to do startup and so forth and so on. A view of the radio panel. This is very useful because you need to use your radio and navigation very often. And then I'll do a view of the overhead from the seat. That's it. Now we continue here. We continue the floor. So we've come down, we've done the left circuit breaker panel, and at this point let's pretend we're just continuing onto this side, on the left side of the plane. We check the oxygen mask, this red button here, we can hear the flow, and then we check this button over here that it stops it. Then we can hide the column by clicking here. We turn the lights to bright, 1, 2, 3, and then we set as well the first officer here. We check that this one, the nose wheel steering cover, is closed. We check that the clock is on UTC, so you can click here and it turns on to local time, or you can click on to UTC. Then you check that these are normal, so this one will change the lower DU. So if you had a failure and you couldn't see your navigation display, you could turn it and you could have it here. Or if you had a failure of this one, you can see the engine, and so forth and so on. The same for here. So you can, any eventuality of any screen not working, you can change another screen to show that information. We check that both are normal. Then we check a full lighting test as you're coming up here. So this is just to check the bulbs. So you're checking that every single bulb is working. There we are, and these indications are flashing. Then you turn it off. You reset this one, the master caution, and then you check that the autopilot, auto throttle, disconnect, and FMS messages, the warnings are working. So you have the yellow, and then you have the red and yellow here, and you check it on this side as well. And that's it. At this point, having come all the way from the left, having done this, the clock, these two, we are up to the EFIS. So on the EFIS panel, we're going to configure for today, well, today QNH and MSRA. I'll tell you about those. QNH, you can take it from your map over here, and you go click on the airport under details, and you scroll to the bottom, you have the QNH. Otherwise, you can open your AVI tab, go into airports, load where you are, and at the bottom you have the meter. Now sometimes it's not available, so the map works. I still haven't figured out really if it's because I have I use Active Sky, which is a payware, so it's not for everybody, but it is a more accurate depiction of the weather. Graphically is a lot better, than the default one, and it's more up to date. So if you fly on VATSIM, sometimes the default weather, even though it's the real weather of Explain, sometimes is an hour or 2 hours old. So it might happen that if you fly online, you get in an airport where everybody is using a certain runway, and you're using a different one because the wind has been moving in the last hour, and it might create problems. So that's why I'm using Active Sky. I'm checking Active Sky. It's a different window. It's an external window. You won't see me doing that, but it's 1021. It is, I believe, it is injected on the map. So the map shows what you have in Active Sky, just not on AviTab. So the QNH is 1021. Very important to set that straight away. QNH is over here, displayed here at the bottom of the altitude tape. So the base of the button, the knob over here, you can switch between inches of mercury or hectopascal. In Europe we use hectopascal, so we switch it to the right, and we just turn the top of the knob there, 1021. The center button is what we use to set it to standard once we're at altitude. On the ground, it's very, very important that we set it correctly. Once we set it, we cross-check that the altitude makes sense. So you open your chart here, your AviTab. This is Madrid, and it tells us that Madrid Barajas. Oh, sorry, we're not in Madrid. I was going to do the flight from Madrid. I had set everything up, then I decided to do Barcelona. Sorry, big mistake there. So we're in Barcelona, we're not in Madrid. In Barcelona, yeah, still not giving us the meter, but we'll check on Active Skies. 1021 is the same. So Barcelona, El Prat. You see, good to do these checks because you might spot mistakes. So, but Madrid was more than 1,000 feet, and it didn't make sense, and that told me that I was in the wrong airport. Barcelona, 14 feet. Here is showing, well, around 30, so that's good enough. Within 20 feet is absolutely fine. Also because hectopascals are not as precise as inches of mercury. So every 3 units of inches of mercury, you have only 1 of hectopascal. So you set there 1021, you set the first officer 1021, and then you set the standby altimeter over here. You switch between hectopascal and inches here, and then you turn the knob 1021. They're all 3 set 1021, and they're all cross-checked. Second thing we do, we set the minimum safe retraction altitude for the flaps. That means that if you had an engine out, an engine failure, when you take off, that would be the altitude, the minimum altitude at which you would go before starting to retract your flaps. Because to retract your flaps, you need to accelerate, so you need to put your nose down and slow your ascent, let's say, your climb. So it's very simple. It's always 1,000 meters above airfield. So again, you take your altitude here, 14 at 1,000, and it's always exactly that. So you switch it to baro. It's not a radio altitude. Radio altitude is radio waves emitted by the plane downwards to check how far exactly the ground is. If you do it on baro, it's only a barometric altitude, so it's based on the pressure. So the airplane knows how high it is based on the correct pressure. Now it starts from 200. We just need to turn the knob clockwise. So we turn it, we put it here where it's clockwise, hold down the left button, and it goes all the way up. 1014 baro set, and then we need to set it here as well. And then we go. We're good with that. We press terrain, which means the terrain will be displayed on your navigation display, and airports. So all the airports are displayed around the area. Not yet, because the plane still doesn't know where it is. And then over here again, the first officer, terrain, and airport. There we go. So the EFIS is all done. These other 2 switches, this one they display if you have a VOR set up over here, or if you have an NDB which is set up over here, it will display an arrow here on the navigation display pointing at that navigation aid. So if you want to display the VOR, you click it, you leave it up. If you want to display an ADF and NDB, you click it down. Otherwise you can leave it off. And then of course it's very important as well to get the DME, the distance from that VOR. So if, for example, let's look for a VOR here. If you look at that VOR 116.7, you set it here 116.7, then activate it, put it up. At this point you can see that it gives us the DME distance is 1.3 because it's here just at the end of the runway. If you put it off, that would disappear. Of course, ADF NDBs, they don't give the distance, they only give a bearing. And voila. So that is done. At this point we would go on to the FNC. The FNC is not a pop-out like many other planes. You need to just set a view. I forgot to tell you, a view earlier onto the FNC. Now, first thing we do, we click. You have all these buttons on the left and all the buttons on the right, and they just activate exactly the option next to them. So you just click this one on the FNC. This is the ident position. We just check that the airplane is what we're flying, so it's 737-800. Database is active. Actually, mine is expired a few days ago, and I'm too lazy normally when I need to do a quick flight to update all of them. There's like 5 different ones for different planes, but it will still work. And that's it. That's all checked, making sure that you have your database. We click first of all on pause init. Pause init is the page that tells the plane where we are. So first thing we do, we tell the plane where we are. We always cross-check it on our flight plan. So we are LEBL. You can check again on the map where you are, and you can see here LEBL. So enter that LEBL, Lima Echo Bravo Lima. Gate, there's no need to put it. Now the airplane knows where it is. We have a GPS position. So once you're in the Posinit page, you can always see how many pages there are up here. So this is 1 out of 3. So to go in the other pages, you have the buttons here. Previous page, next page. Go on to next page. By standard, by default, we take always the GPS left position if it's available. So when I will be talking about Scratchpad, is this part at the bottom. So when you click the buttons, it will write text over here, as you see. Then you press clear. Or if you copy something, it will copy and paste it there. So by clicking here where there's information filled out already, if you click, it will copy into the Scratchpad. Now it stays there. We go back on the previous page and we paste it by putting it onto an empty slot. So we click it here and we have now the ILS position. Now the airplane knows where it is. As you can see now, the terrain radar is there. It knows where the VOR is physically. It knows where the airports are around you. So at this point, it knows exactly where it is. This is the accuracy of the position, which, as you see, is increasing. So the accuracy is up to 1 mile is required, and it's going down. So normally the accuracy will be moving depending on where you are and depending on different circumstances, but this is the minimum required to be accurate, and this is the actual one. So 1 is required. The accuracy here is normally 0.05, so you know it's very, very accurate, or can go as accurate as 0.03. So there you know you're good. And that's it. The airplane knows where we are, and now we'll tell him what we're doing today. So we click on menu FNC. We were here. We click on route over here, and we tell him what we're going to do today. Now at this point you need your flight plan, whether you created one yourself or you have it from SimBrief. I normally use SimBrief, which is free and it's absolutely phenomenal, so no need to do anything manually. SimBrief is incredibly accurate. Now we know the origin. If you haven't touched anything else and did the step as I said, you will have the origin already into the Scratchpad, so you don't need to type it in, so you can just put it there. And then we need to put a destination. Destination in this case is Lima Echo X-Ray Juliet, which is Santander. Lima Echo X-Ray Juliet, and we put it here. We need to tell CO route. If you had a flight plan saved onto the FMS plans in Explain, you can load the plan from here. Ryanair doesn't do that. Ryanair inputs manually all flight plans, and normally in the 737 the flight plans are relatively short, so there's really no need to do that automatically. I prefer to input them myself. Flight number, you find it here on your flight plan. Now this flight plan, normally on SimBrief you get the Lido format, so it's the format in which it's written. Different airlines have different formats depending on what information is more relevant to set up their aircraft. Here I use the Ryanair, which is really handy because it gives you a couple of info that you need to set up the plane here, instead of having to go and fish them from the following pages. So this is the Ryanair flight plan. Now the flight number is here, Ryanair to Echo Quebec, so we input it there, to Echo Quebec, and we put it there, flight number. Runway is the runway where we are departing from, so we just go in here, and it's runway on this second page. Well, in reality it's the third page because the first one is that. So we go on to the third page, and here you have your routing. So this one you need to enter it all in the FNC. 25 right is the departure runway. 25 right, and we put it there. And now we know that. Now we need to put the route. So this is page 1 of 2 of the route page. So we moved on to the next page, and you have, these are your waypoints that you'll be following. If you're using airways, you need to put here the name of the airways, and then the name of the waypoint will be on the right. If you're going direct without using an airway, you just enter the waypoint. Here we can see both. So first of all, we put the waypoints. Now, if you can see here, grouse 2P, that's your standard in instrumental departure, so your SID. So that we don't need to put it now. We just put the first waypoint, which is grouse. We do grouse, and we check it there. At this point, we need to take an airway, which is this one, uniform M601, and we put it on the left. And then we're going to Bravo Lima Victor, and we put it there. And then we have our star, our arrival. So no other points, it was only 1 and 2 points. That's all done, and now we click on departure arrival, the button here, and now we're gonna set the departure, SIDS and stars, and arrival. Departure runway, we said is 25 right, is now here, so we click next page, and you see the rest. It says selected, but make sure that you select it again, and there's no other options there. Then the SID is going to be a grouse to Papa, so again, next page, grouse to Papa. Select it, and that's good. Now you click again on departure arrival, click here next to arrival, next to the airport, the destination airport, and here we're going to do, what are we going to do? I didn't check what we're going to do. I'll check briefly on Navigraph, which is another great addition. It's £10 a month if you do quite a lot of flight simming, and you do, especially if you do airliners. It's an absolutely vital piece of software. You cannot see here, it's on another screen, but it gives you all the maps, and it gives you the possibility to create your flight plans and double check the SIDs and stars, which is the very, very difficult thing to do unless you have that. There are free versions that are, well, less updated and etc. that you can still make do with, but I think Navigraph is almost essential. Nothing is, but I think if I had to choose one thing to pay for, it would definitely be Navigraph. Okay, I'm just choosing to arrive. Bear me 1 second. There we go. So we're gonna do a landing on runway 29 in Santander. As you can see here, it will be an ILS Z29. You can find information about these things, why they call ILS Z, ILS Y. It's normally just a slightly different procedure, or slightly different misapproach. But important thing is that it's an ILS. You select ILS. You can have via a transition. In this case, we're not going to use it. And Navigraph, the great thing about Navigraph is that you can see what to do with all this. Otherwise, sometimes it's a bit complicated. And the arrival is going to be, as you can see here, Bravo Lima Victor 5 Echo. And there we go. At this point, you click on route here, and you can activate it. Now, in reality, you wouldn't execute it until your first officer has checked it, but we don't have a first officer, so we can execute it. In this case, you can see. So let's bring up the range. So this is the range knob for the navigation display for the MD. I'll deactivate the terrain in a second, so we have a clearer view. And then here you can move the range. At this point, you see it's been set up in blue, a dotted blue line, so not very easy to see. When we execute it, then it will turn into our famous magenta line. So this allows us to check that is correct. So we'll check straight away that this makes sense. What we entered is okay, there's no discontinuities. We come here at this knob over here, we turn it on to map, on to plan. We were on map, we turn it to plan. So the 4 modes over here, you can visualize approach, you can visualize VOR, or map is the normal mode where you keep it, and then plan to check the flight plan. So you turn it to plan, you see it's different. Normally I put it around 10 or 20 miles. Come on the FNC, have a look, have a view that shows you both the FNC and this display. Click on two legs. You're at the top of your flight plan at the beginning, and then by clicking step here on the right, it will move. You can see, you can check every single point, and you can check at this point that they're sequenced correctly, and then there's no interruptions in the magenta line. So you keep clicking step, you see there's no interruptions, all the waypoints are linked. And that's good. The important part is that there are no interruptions at the magenta line. If there were interruptions at the magenta line, sometimes it happens, especially on arrival at airports. Again, Navigraph is very useful to understand why there is this discontinuity. Sometimes discontinuities are okay, especially in the States when you arrive at an airport. The last waypoints. So imagine the last waypoint of your flight plan will be, let's say this one over here, and then the first waypoint of your arrival would be there. There might not be a link between the two, because you need to, normally you would be vectored by air traffic controllers. They would tell you at this point turn heading 270 until intercepting the ILS for runway 29, and you would do that. If you had that discontinuity, normally you would leave it, or of course if you were offline, you didn't have a traffic controller, you could join it. At that point you would have something called, highlighted here, that is called a discontinuity, and you would need to get rid of it. It would be a blank. Imagine this BLV is saying discontinuity. To cancel it, you would just take the point below, click on it so it's in the scratch pad, and then paste it on top of the discontinuity, and that would cancel the discontinuity. Same thing if you have something called vector. So at this point, if it was, like I said, there will be a point called vector as well that will continue from the last waypoint on forever, and you could delete that as well. Today is all sequenced when in Europe, so there's no issues. If you had discontinuities in the middle of the flight plans, you might have entered some wrong waypoints, and you need to try and find out what mistakes you made. If it's all good, that's it. That's you done. Go back to route, and we can do the performance init over here. Now, to do that, we need to load the plane. Actually, sorry, in all the talking, forgot it would have been better to load the plane at the beginning. Once you step into it, try and do the loading straight away, because the fuel takes a while to load. So to load the plane, we go on to home, we go on to fuel weight and balance, and we go on to payload. Showing you the zero fuel weight of the empty plane is 43 tons. Payload is 0 and fuel is 2,750. Now you take your operational flight plan over here and you check your weights. If you go on to the first page, you have the zero fuel weight is here. It's telling you the zero fuel weight for today against the maximum zero fuel weight, so we are within range. So 58 tons. So we need to load the payload to get us to 58 tons. We have 43 to begin with, so we need to add what we're missing. Okay, now here there is can be quite complicated. You could potentially enter every single person, male, female and kids. The weight varies if it's adults or kids, but what we're gonna do, we're just gonna click on payload here at the bottom, and then we enter the total payload. In this case it's 14,889 between to make up this weight. Click enter and it's already assigned automatically. Go back to home, back to fuel weight and balance payload, and we double check 58 and 58. Next thing is the fuel. So we need the total fuel. You have it here, planned fuel. Fuel is made up by your trip fuel. So for your flight time, you have a contingency always of around 5%. In this case, exactly 5%. The alternate is to make it to the alternate airport, which is in this case is Madrid. So you need 2 tons to get to Madrid. Final reserve by law, when you land, you need to always have half an hour of fuel, and that is there. And plus you have a couple of 100 kilograms for taxing. Always consider 20 minutes of taxing. So this is the kilograms, and this is the time that allows you to fly. Block fuel total. Is this the number you need? 5,813. So you put it there, 5,813, and then it's not loaded yet. You need to make sure that you press fuel and fuel truck call. Now if you go back into payload, you'll see that the actual starts to build up. Anyway, we let it fuel up. At this point we can do performance in it. Actually, a little trick, I'll show you this one because it can be quite useful if you forget, like me, and you have a long flight. If you open up the iOS for X-Plane, you can set the fuel here. So it's quite slow to fuel up, so it might take a while, and if you had like 13 tons, it will take a very long time. You can change here the total internal fuel to what you need. So in this case we can do 5,813, and then it will go automatically. You see it's not fueling anymore. Of course, depending on what you're doing, you round this one, you can round it up. I know I'm not flying online, there's no air traffic controllers, so I always have a lot more fuel than I need. But if you were flying online, you might want to round it up first, or decide to add some extra fuel if it was a busy event, etc. Make sure you plan your fuel accordingly. And that's it. Now the fuel is loaded. We go back onto our FMC and we start entering all these details. Zero fuel weight, it will take it automatically. There's no need for you to type it in. You can just click the button on the left, and it's 58. Just check that it makes sense. That's what we needed, is 58. We put the reserves, which you need to add up yourself. If you turn one page, you have here the reserves are actually the final reserve, which is what we said we need by law, half an hour, plus the alternate. So ideally when we land, we want to have this fuel. So we add up those two together. So that's 2,9, that's 3, and we round up to 3.1. 3.1. The reason we put it here is because once we're flying, if it's for any reason we're burning more fuel than we're expected to, once the plane predicts that it's going to get at arrival with less than this figure, it will warn you. It will tell you using reserve fuel. So at that point you need to be careful. Cost index. Cost index from the company, Ryanair always uses 6. Is an indication of how much fuel you're going to use. Low cost index, you use very little fuel and you go slower. High cost index, you use more fuel and you go faster. So very expensive airlines will use normally higher cost index than budget airlines. Ryanair uses 6. There we are. The cruise altitude, we'll check it here, 290. It's a bit low for this trip. Not entirely sure, because this one it tells you the potential cruise altitude that you could use, and normally, unless it was a very short flight, it would be very close to that. Today with 290, doesn't really matter, we put it there. We need to put the cruise wind, and this is the beauty of the Ryanair format flight plan. Normally you would need to go and find your cruise winds down, scrolling down on your waypoints here at the top of climb. When you read TOC, that's your top of climb, and you would take your winds here, 207 at 46. And then you have your ISA deviation, which is indicated here. Here, minus 0.1, the middle one. But this being a Ryanair flight plan, we'll have it in the first page. So top of cruise, top of climb wind, 207 at 46. So we write those, 207 and slash 046. And we put it here. And we do the ISA deviation, which is minus 0.1. Bear in mind, in information like here, on the FNC, if there's a slash, to enter data, you need to always consider that. So if you wanted to enter the data on the left, you would always write that and then put the slash. So that tells the computer that you're entering what's on the left of the slash, while if you wanted to enter what's on the right, you will do slash first and then the info, and it will put it on the right. That works. It's useful to know for a lot of things that you need to program. In this case, temperature, there isn't a slash because it's either Fahrenheit or Celsius, so you just put it. It's minus 0.1, you can see here, top of climb ISA, deviation from standard temperature, so it's minus 1, you click minus 0.1, and you put it there. And that's it. Then you're ready. You check your transition altitude. This one you would check it on your charts. So open up Avitab. Here I have all the Navigraph charts. I've been subscribed to Navigraph, so this is something that you'll have only if you have Navigraph. And again, £10 a month, but it adds so much to the experience, so much to the immersion. No plane would ever fly without charts. And finding them for free it's a lot of a headache, other than just typing here and having every single chart in the world at your disposal. So it's really handy. The departure, we said that it was going to be called Grouse 2 Papa. So we check the departure, Grouse 2 Papa, and we have it. Transition altitude normally will be on your departure chart, so your SID. And here, transition altitude 6,000. Most of the times you will get it right, well, the vast majority of times. So transition altitude 6,000, perfect. We can execute using reserve fuel. It's telling you that it's using reserve fuel. Now we'll check why, how much it thinks we're using. At this point, we check the N1 limit. In reality, to finish these last inputs, you will need your load sheet that comes when your plane is full. When your plane is all being loaded, you have the load sheet from the ground personnel, and then you would check this information. And but it's the same, so we don't need that. We know the weight we have on board. We've already set it, so we can finish this information. Now, all this info is normally it comes from a performance takeoff calculator that we don't have for a 737-800. There's none available really. You have your performance takeoff, but it's not actually implemented yet. So you will normally put all your data, the runway, the condition, the weather condition, your weight, and it would tell you how much power to use in the engines, configuration, etc. This is not been implemented yet, so it's not working. So this is normally for fuel saving, but mostly to save engine life. So you see D rate here. So the full power of the plane is 26k. You could derate it to 24k or to 22. And in that case, you see the power of the plane, instead of going from 99%, it goes down to 92.6. In reality, it's done to save and to extend engine life and lower maintenance costs. We don't have that in the sim, so it doesn't really matter. You can simulate it or no if you want. You can do it by derating here or by telling the plane that the outside temperature is different from what it is. So you will always put a higher temperature. In this case, it's 19 degrees. You could put 40 and it reduces. Let's use this one, and so we see a slightly reduced takeoff. That point that is set, we click on to takeoff, and we set the flaps. Flaps on a 737 you can use up to flaps 25, so we can use 1, 5, 10, 15, 25, but 99.5% of the times you would use flaps 5. You would use more than flaps 5 only if you were very heavy and you had a very short runway. You could use flaps up to 25 to take off and a much shorter distance. Problem is, once you use higher flap settings, because flaps create a lot of drag, so they slow the airplane down, then the climb would be very slow. So there's always a consideration of short runway or terrain. So if we had high terrain in front of us, like, I don't know, an airport in a valley like Innsbruck, you wouldn't really want to use higher flap settings, because then you will struggle really to climb. If the terrain around you is flat, then it's absolutely fine. But normally it's flaps 5 for most of the flights. Center of gravity, it's automatic, so the airplane takes it from where we entered on the tablet earlier, and it's 26.2. The trim is 4.5. This is important, we need to remember, because we need to set the stub trim here to 4.5. Now this is the coincidence that is exactly on 4.5. You can then set it. Make sure you bind 2 keys to trim up, vertical stabilizer trim, up and down, preferably on your joystick if you had them on top of your joystick, because the trim is something that you need to use a lot. So if you trim here, the higher the number, the more the plane pitches the nose up, and the lower the number, the more the nose pitches down. Now we have our trim. At this point we have the speeds. V1, which is the speed at which you cannot eject a takeoff anymore. You cannot stop, there's not enough space for you to stop before the end of the runway. VR, which is your rotation speed, the speed at which you rotate and take off. And V2, the speed at which you climb, the minimum speed at which you climb. So to activate them, you have them calculated. You click next to it and you make sure that it goes in a bigger font. 134, 136, 145. Now you need to set these straight away, otherwise you'll forget. So V2 is set on the NCP panel over here. So you set that 145 and we're good. V1 and VR are set in this little knob here. Normally the plane would fetch them automatically from the FNC, but here we need to do it manually. So we switch this one, the base of the right knob over here, to V1. You can see here you have V1 and VR. You switch it to V1 and you see coming up here is 100. You turn the top of the knob where you need it, so 134, that's 134, and then we move it to VR, which is 136, and we set 136. And then we need to make sure that we turn the base of the knob back to auto, otherwise these are not activated. Once you click it to auto, from the bottom it goes to the top. V1 is 134 and V2 here is 145. That's it. Lastly, you see takeoff ref, you have one page out of 2. You have a second page over here to the right, and this is your acceleration height, altitude, and engine out acceleration altitude, and thrust reduction. So normally you've put full thrust to takeoff, but then you would reduce the thrust to thrust climb, so a lower thrust for engine life again, fuel saving, and noise. There's a lot of information on noise abatement departure procedures. There are procedures designed to lower the noise in the areas around the airports. There is an extract here that you can find online if you Google NADB 12AB. It shows you everything. So this is document that you find on Google on the first result. Just Google NADB 12AB and you come up with this one. By standard, it's using the Zibo has configured a procedure A, which is here. So you see 1,500 feet, you have the reduction to climb thrust. I like to use a cutback option. So by clicking here on the right or cutback, configures it in a slightly different way, as you can see. So you have a more pronounced cutback of the engines to reduce noise at the minimum. And the one that it does already, that it does automatically when you do that, it's an NADP2. And the NADP1 and NADP2, there are videos about it, but basically NADP2, it makes a little bit more noise because you start to accelerate closer to the ground, while the NADP1 is used very much in Europe, where there are, like in the States, there's not many cities around the airports, and so they use mostly NADP2, while in Europe the cities are very just around the airport, so they use NADP1. NADP1, it means that you keep your flaps and you keep your V2 speed plus 15, plus 20, whatever it is, your slowest possible speed out to 3,000 feet, and only then you start to accelerate. So you try and get off the ground as far away as you can vertically in the shortest distance possible. While the NADP2, once you reach 800 feet, then you start retracting the flaps and being a little bit more horizontal, let's say, if that makes sense. So it's a bit more noisy, but I like the flow of the NADP2. That's all set as an NADP2, so the reduction of the thrust will happen at 800 feet above ground level. At 1,000 feet above ground level, we have the acceleration, which means the airplane will pitch down and accelerate so that you can retract the flaps. And at 3,000 feet, it will restore the climb power. So the climb power is set to 83, the climb power will be more than that, and so we will restore the power. Well, we see that when we depart. So you don't need to do anything, just set cutback on and you have it programmed. At this point we're ready. The FNC is done. So at this point we start a flow. We go on the overhead panel and we start our overhead flow. The way it works in the Boeing, try and show you a better view, is from the left to the right, from the top to the bottom. So you start this panel, this panel, this panel, and so forth and so on, up to this panel, and then you do this one, coming back. Okay, so basically we need to make sure that all the lights are off, or some will stay on, and we know why they stay on. So we start from the top. Low pressure, we know that we have no hydraulic pressure at all, it's okay. Everything else needs to be off. The yaw damper needs to be on. That's what automatically sets. Use rudder to coordinate the turns and to make for a more comfortable ride. We have here the fuel pumps. There's 2 for the center tanks and 2 for each wing. Today we do not have fuel in the center tanks because we have only 5,800, so we don't need the center pumps. We check the crossfeed valve, turn it here, so the crossfeed, the 2 wings is open. It tells you valve open, so that's good. And then it goes back bright and it goes off. Turn the fuel pumps on, check that the low pressure light goes off. Second panel here, this is what tells you the amps and the volts of either the ground power, you can see here, or the generator of the engine, or the APU. It's not something that you really need to use because we know it's always perfect. It's a simulation. Even in reality, I believe some airlines don't really bother too much with this. These 2 switches, they need to be so cabin utility and the passenger seats. They have electricity. Standby power is fine. This one stays on drive. Here we don't need to do anything. We go here in the smaller panel in the middle. Only things we need to do is to put the seat belts on, making sure that the fueling is completed, otherwise you leave the seat belts off. Seat belt goes to on, come up, window heat, all 4 go on now. I'll show you have your green light. Pitot heat, so the probe heat, doesn't come on now, only when we actually start the engine, so this one can stay off. Electric hydraulics pump, they can go on now. So if you come here on the center panel, you have the MFD, which is this one, set to engine, or you can put it to system. And here it shows you the wheels, and it shows, I believe, the temperature of the brakes, and then the pressure. Here you have hydraulic fuel, 82, which is good, and then you have pressure is 0. Once we turn on the electric hydraulic pumps, the pressure will rise. So electric hydraulic pumps on, you see the low pressure light goes off, and the pressure is rising. You need to check that you have at least 2800. It will always be, there's no failures simulated here, so it will always be that. You check that, and then you put this page back to engine. Once you have that, here we have the forward and aft cargo doors open. Need to make sure that they will be off when we start. And here the air conditioning panel. Trim air goes on. Here you can see the temperature in the cabin. If you want to play very realistically, you check this one at the beginning of your flight. If you were in a very hot environment or very cold and you wanted to sort the air out, you could use here in your ground services your ASU. You could connect this one. You see here is the big one, very noisy, and that's the aircon. You can see this pipe. It's an air duct that goes into the plane and provides air conditioned. Otherwise, if you didn't have that, you could use the APU from the beginning, but it consumes fuel, it pollutes the air, so you normally try not to use it. At this point, we'll turn that off so I can show you something else. ASU disconnect. So you see the duct pressure here is 0 because we don't have the engines or the APU on. When you put the ASU, you see the pressure builds up. Okay, it's very important to know how this works for reasons that I will explain in a second. At this point, we've done the trim air. We then do the left back auto, right back to auto, and the rest stays the same. This is extremely important. This little panel here is the pressurization of the cabin, so you need to set the flight altitude. So we check it on our flight plan. We said that today we were gonna fly at 290. There we are, flight level 290. Double check it always on the flight plan, and you set it there, and then your landing altitude at destination. So you can check it on the charts. We were going to XJ, wasn't it? Santander, elevation 16 feet. It's rounded up at the nearest 50, so in this case we leave it to 0. Lights, at the moment we don't need anything. We could have put, normally when you start you put a wheel well on if it's a little darker, so the pilot, the second pilot, the first officer, or the pilot who's doing the external inspection can check the wheel bay, the gear bay, but we can keep it off. Nothing has to be done here. We've done our flow, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 panels, the lights, and then we come down on the NCP. On the NCP, we turn the flight directors on, 1 and 2. You can see coming up here, flight directors and flight director on the PFD. You can then recheck your V2, that is correct, that's 145. The heading will need to be runway heading, so you need to take your airport chart. We're departing from 25 right, and the heading will be 245. So you set 245 here on the heading. 245 is set, and then the altitude, the first altitude, normally this altitude will be assigned by ATC when you ask them for clearance. So they will tell you you're cleared to Santander and your initial altitude will be 7,000 feet. I always like to do the steps, so put a fictitious altitude, so then you have something to do once you depart, and you need to set it to your cruise altitude later. So 7,000 altitude, give yourself some time. Of course, make sure that if you're departing from a crazy high altitude airport, like 5,000 feet above the ground, make sure you put it higher, otherwise the airplane will stop climbing very, very quickly. And that's it. So you set your speed, heading, altitude, flight directors, and you're good to go. Then we come down, again we continue the flow, we come below, the auto brakes to RTO, so reject takeoff, make sure this one, the red light goes off. These have already been set, we need to reset the fuel flow. You see here the box says nothing, so we reset it, and now it says 0 fuel used, and it's reset. We check the standby altimeter is correct, we checked it earlier, we checked that we have what we need here. So this is the same thing that we do here, showing the VOR. So here it tells you where the VOR is. We can use these as well. So this one is a needle that tells you where what you selected is. So in this case, let me see if there's an NDB here. No, there doesn't seem to be any. No, I won't be able to show you that, but I can show you the VOR. So if you set the same VOR on this side as well, 116.7, you can see that now the needle points at the VOR. Same thing here. If you press the center of this button, the ND, the navigation display, changes to a row. So in this case you can see everything around you, and if you put it like this you can see only what's in front of you. You might need it for different reasons. So you can see the needle here is pointing at the VOR. So if I put these off, you have no indication of your VORs that you set here. If I turn it on, you have a little arrow there that points at where the VOR is, which is here, and this is the course that you set. So if you turn this knob, it gives you different courses. This will be useful for many things that you can learn. We don't need it really, and it's cluttering a little bit, all this green stuff, so we don't need it, and we put it off. But you can visualize it here, as you can see. This is the VR2. This is where the pointer is going. It's the same thing. We know that in respect to us, the VOR is at 0.75 degrees. Okay, so we can deactivate that, and you can leave. This one you cannot deactivate it. You can only switch it to NDB or to VOR. NDB will be what we said is set over here. That's it. Check that that one is the way you need it. Then we check the radius. In this case, of course, we would tune already. We would have ground tuned at this point. We will tune tower. We will tune approach and etc. Unless you're a VATSIM, you don't need to do anything there. And these are your nav aids. You need to check whether we need any nav aids at all today, and that's based on the kind of departure procedure that you have. So in this case, we might want to set something. You need to just simply study your charts. So let's see if I can make it a little bit bigger. So our departure chart, oh, there's an NDB there, so we can set that as well. So if you have only these little stars, it means that it's only a GPS and RNAV procedure, so you don't need any nav aids. But if you have any of these are the VORs, or these are the NDBs. You can set those nav aid, navigational aids, as a backup. So if you were to take off and you had a failure of your FNC or your GPS, you could navigate the old-fashioned way and still complete this procedure in that way. In this case only partly, but you can still do that. Now in this case, for example, you see this 245, you can set it from the Barcelona VOR. You need this one because it's set here. So this first waypoint tells you that you need to be at 5.5 from BCN, which is this VOR. So that's something that we need. So at this point we set 116.7, we have it set, and we're good to go. We set as well the 245 course on both sides, so you can either visualize it on one or the other PFD. So at this point, if we click VOR here, we see what we need to do. As you can see, it coincides with the magenta line, so that's exactly what we need to do. And then another thing that we might want to put is the NDB 404. So you set 404 here, you click it active and put it there as well. At this point we don't have a course. NDB tells you only a direction, you cannot set courses, but if now it's too far, it's not picking it up. So if you see red here, we click to ADF, it should tell us where the NDB is, but it's too far at the moment, it's not picking it up yet. The same thing you would try here. But this one actually is picking it up. 404 ADF, which is this one, is in that direction, and again it makes sense. We're facing that way, this one is northwest and is northwest of us. That's it. So you could choose to visualize the VOR and the NDB, so you have full situational awareness of where everything is. Well, we've done all that. This is all ready. You will set, of course, your squawk if you were on VATSIM online. And after this, we do a briefing. Briefings are extremely important. The pilot flying, the captain, would brief everything that we're going to do from now till we're up in the air, to make sure that you review in your head, you know what's coming up, and the other pilot knows it. Of course, if you're really confident with what you've done and you want to save some time, you don't need to do it. It's a simulation, but it is a very good exercise. Adds immersion to your experience, and it's just a good way to double check that what you enter is correct. I do the briefing in conjunction with double checking the data on the FNC, because I don't have a first officer who checked that, so I tend to do it that way. Now, to do the briefing, you need to definitely have your airport chart, your weather, and your departure chart. That's all you need. Now, in terms of weather, let's discuss the weather straight away. The weather today, I'll check it on Active Sky. It's lovely sunny. There's wind at 210 from 210 at 8 knots. So you check straight away that your runway makes sense. The wind is coming from 210, and the runway needs to be as close as possible as the number of the wind, because of course the runway is pointing at 250 degrees. We know that the wind is coming from 210 degrees, which is pretty much here. So we know that, well, we could use runway 20, but it's shorter. It's a lot shorter. So 25 right is a good runway to leave from. So we know that the wind is 210 at 8 degrees. Sorry, 210 at 8 knots. We know that the wind will be 40 degrees to our left at 8 knots. Nothing to worry about. It means that we just need to use a little bit of right rudder, sorry, looking at that side. We need to use a little bit of right rudder to compensate. It's good to brief it. We know that as soon as we put power up, we'll need a little bit of right rudder. For the rest, visibility is great. It's KVOC conditions. QNH 1021, and we'll redouble check that 1021, and we check 1021, and we do a cross check of the instruments, the baro, the MSRA. We check that is correct, and the altitude displayed is the same, 30 feet, 30 feet. Initial altitude 7,000. You can check this at this point. Now the weather is good, so it is not affecting our departure. The runway is dry. We come here and we go on to menu, FNC. Again, we check the database is correct. We go on to POSINIT. Actually, go on to init. No, sorry. first we do route, and we check that this makes sense with our OFP, operational flight plan. ELBL Barcelona to Santander, LEXJ. Today we are flight Ryanair to Echo Quebec, and we'll be departing from runway 25 right. We'll check the departure. We're departing from runway 25 right via the Grau 2 Papa departure, and that's correct. The waypoints, check that out. Next page is going to be Grau 2 Papa to Graus. We then do UM601 to Bravo Lima Victor, and then we have the arrival Bravo Lima Victor 5 Echo on to runway 29 with the ILS 29. So that's all correct. We check the zero fuel weight. So again, zero fuel weight 58 tons and a fuel of 5.8 requested, 5.8 on board. Cruise altitude is 290 and transition altitude is 6,000 as per the chart over here. 6,000. There we go. We check as well onto the progress page, which is the last one here. This is the length in miles of the trip. So destination is Santander, 311 miles, which you find in this page over here. Ground distance 307. So it makes sense. If there was a major difference, you could have made a mistake in the flight plans. Within 5-10 miles, it's absolutely perfect. And then the fuel at destination is 3.1. So that's what we expect to have. After that, we just check the N1 limit. We recap what we said in terms of reduction. We're taking off with 95.4% of thrust, and you can see it's set up here. 40 degrees, and 95.4. We're gonna take off with flaps 5 and trim is 4.5, V1 134, VR 136, and V2 is 145, and we can all double check it there. Perfect. So this is all good. We recap the taxi. So we are here at stand 110 at terminal 2. We need to taxi to runway 25 right. Expected taxi today will push with the tail, with the nose facing southeast, and then we will taxi here via Sierra. We'll probably go here by Bravo 7 and go on to Sierra all the way to Sierra 1 or Tango 1 to depart from runway 25 right. We need to be careful because we need to cross an actual runway. We will depart from runway 25 right. We have the distance, so we check the distance as well. It's shown here as well in your takeoff reference. It is 3,347 meters, so we know there is plenty of runway. Flaps 5, normal departure, no particular concerns there apart the departure. Once we take off, we double check what we're gonna do here. Check on the legs. We take off, we go on a heading of 245. Climbing, as you can see, the first waypoint is this one. We need to be at least 3,000 feet. So we climb at least 3,000 feet. Second waypoint will be Gavma, 3,500 feet at least. So above, here it says the A means above. If there was a B, it will tell you below. You can see here there is one line underneath the number. It means we need to be above 3,500. If it's above and below, it tells you need to be at exactly 500 at that point. If it's only a line above the number, it means that you need to be below that altitude. So that all checks. Again, Zibo is particularly good at getting all these constraints correct, but if there wasn't any, you might need to put it manually. So if you, for example, deleted that constraint, you can press delete and click here, and then execute, you see, then we would have a problem, because this here it says not actually making. You can then enter it if it wasn't there and you saw it on the chart. You see, oh, GAFMA, we need to be at least 3,500. It's not there. You need to enter it manually. So we need to do the slash like we said before, because it's to the right, and you write 3,500 above, and you check it there, and then execute. Same thing with the speed. If you wanted to put the speed limitation, if it was there, you would be like here it says maximum 230. We're not on this track, we're departing from 25 right, so we don't have speed limitations. But if we had one, you would need to check that this one is a number that's written larger than the other one. So if it was 230 slash to enter it here, it would be coded this way. You can see it's written larger than the other ones, and in this case it's magenta just because it's the first restriction we have in terms of speed. Then again, you can delete it, and we re-enter our altitude constraint. There we go. We will be going to BL Bravo Lima 059, and then we will turn right towards Bravo Lima 056, and then towards left towards LRD at above 14,000. That's it. You reviewed everything. We know what we're doing. We know we're departing straight out. Go straight and then make a right turn. If you want, you can double check it again on the flight plan here. Just put it on plan. Get close. This time press legs so it goes to the top, and you can see here this is your first point. We said at least 3,000. Step 3,500. Right turn, left turn onto the NDB. Perfect. Put that back to map, and we have everything. You could do an emergency briefing here. In reality, it's done on the first flight of the day or any crew change. Look online, you can find online examples of departure briefings. Basically, you do an emergency briefing that says what it's going to do if there's any problems on the taxi. So on the taxi out to the runway, we would stop for any problem at all and assess it, any warnings or any issues. Once we're on the runway, before 80 knots, we will stop again for any problem, any issues. After 80 knots until V1, which we said is the speed at which we cannot stop safely before the end of the runway, we would stop between 80 and V1 only in case of an engine fire, engine malfunction, controls malfunction, anything that the pilot flying deems doesn't make the plane safely flyable. So in that case, between 80 knots and V1, we will stop the plane. We say what we do, so we retard the thrust lever to 0, we set the reverser, the speed brake, and we have the RTO, so it means that as soon as we retard the thrust levers, the brakes will apply max pressure automatically. We just check that that is working, and then we will come to a full stop, and then we'll assess the situation. And normally we decide whether you're evacuating because you have an engine fire or you're not evacuating. If there's an engine failure after V1, we, as we said, we cannot stop before the end of the runway, so whatever happens, we need to fly. So after V1, we rotate, we take off, don't do anything up to 400 feet. After 400 feet, then you do whatever checklist you need to do. If it's an engine fire, you secure the engine, fire extinguishers, and etc. And then you climb up to your MSRA, you retract your flaps if you need to, and so forth and so on. Well, of course, depending on the failure, you do the relevant procedure. And that's all we're going to do. Now we are ready to do the checklist. Okay, now to recap just briefly what we've done. We've done our overhead at the beginning. We've come down, checked all these things, kept coming down, and we went right. We did everything we needed to do here on the top, especially the IRS. We came down and we sat down. We did the oxygen, we did the clock, we did these, we did the EFIS, then we came down to the FMS. Once we did the FMS, we went up, we did all our flow, the 5 panels. We came down, we did the MCP, came down here, did everything we needed to do here, here, coming down, the radios, the nav aids, and that was all. So one fluid motion all around the cockpit. We did our briefing. At this point we need to do the checklist. So as I said, you don't use checklist to do all these flows, but after you finish your flows, there is normally a checklist to make sure that you've done everything you needed to do. Before doing the checklist, we start the APU to give some power to the plane. APU switch is here. Click it down once to on. Wait until the low pressure light is on. Give 3 to 5 seconds for the flap at the back to open, so the APU can breathe, get some air, and then you can turn it on. Hold down to start until you see the EGT, the temperature rising. There we go. So now it needs to rise and then it needs to stabilize and come down again. And we cannot apply any sort of load to the APU for 1 minute from when it starts. So what we do in that minute, we'll do the normal checklist. There we go. So the safety inspection checklist first. We do surfaces and chocks. We check that the chocks have been removed. If you have it here, you can check it here. It's never been set. We were on parking brake, so it's fine. Maintenance status is checked. I wish there was maintenance on the Zibo, but there isn't yet, so we know the airplane is good. Battery is on. Electrical hydraulics pumps are on. Landing gear lever is down, and the ship's library has been checked. This is what you would do at the very beginning. Now, before start is what we do now. IRS mode selector. So in real life, the captain will call for the checklist. So we'll say before start checklist. The first officer will take this in his hand, and it's a challenge and answer response. So the first officer reads this item, and the captain or whoever is responsible for this item answers. They need to be checked. You never do it from memory. You actually check the item. So IRS mode selectors, nav, we check they're up there, they're on nav. Gear pins, the beam removed. We don't have a way to see that. Light test is checked, is the one that we did here. Oxygen is tested. We tested the mask here and we know it's 100% because we checked it up there for the crew oxygen. Yaw damper is on up here. Yaw damper is on. Let me see, from here probably is easier to see. Almost. Just wanted you to see without moving too much around. Okay, yaw damper is on. Nav transparent display switches, it's these 4. They're all on normal and the display is on auto. So we say normal and auto. Fuel, we can check as well on the FNC. 5.8, and we check on your flight plan. Flight plan 5.8 required, 5.8 in the FNC and 5.8 on board, and the pumps, 4 pumps are on. So 5.8 required, 5.8 on board, pumps on. Cabin utility IFE galley power is on, so these 2 switches are on. Emergency exit lights armed, we armed at the beginning. Fasten seatbelts is on. Window heat, all 4 on. Air conditioning and pressurization, we know the packs are auto. The bleeds are on, and now that the APU is running, we can put the APU bleed on. So you can see the air here is spiking up. So we're taking air from the turbine, from the APU at the back for air conditioning, and we'll need it for the startup. Then we have pressurization mode selector on auto, it needs to be always auto, and you can see is this switch over here to auto. Then instruments, they're cross-checked. We did cross-checking during the briefing. Auto brake is on RTO. Hydraulics are normal. We checked them earlier, so we're showing normal. Speed brake is down, detent. Parking brake is set, red light. Stop trim cutout switch is normal. This is in the up position. Wheel well fire warning, we checked it earlier. It was this one. And where are we? Radius, radar and transponder, we set them as we needed. Rudder and aileron trims, 3 and 0. It would be these trims over here. In reality, you would check them, but of course it's the same, so they're always set to 0. PA is being completed, so you could do your PA to your passengers. Start fly leg, you can start hitting the passengers. You normally would do it earlier to give a realistic time of loading the plane, and then you can do welcome on board.
Ladies and gentlemen, from the flight deck, this is your captain speaking. On behalf of all the crew, welcome on board this flight. We expect to be
And this is flight deck to sim. Who does the announcement?
We'll be showing you a safety demonstration. This is for your safety and for those around.
Close the door so it's not as loud. Yeah, the reason why I normally don't use Ryanair, the PA, is because you have this Ryanair music always going on while you're doing all your preparation and you're cold and dark. And it's lovely music, but after half an hour every time is a bit annoying. We've done the PA, FNC, CDU. Now normally you would do this checklist a little earlier, before you have your final load sheet and you finish this information on the FNC, but we've done it already. So we can continue. So we do FNC, CDU, it's all set. N1 and EAS bugs, we set them here earlier. Stop trim 4.5 as required. Jumped up to 5, we'll put it back to 4.5 and it's set. EFB, well, we don't have an electronic flyby, that's the tablet they used. There needs to be airplane mode installed, your phones are off. And the cockpit door is closed, and we check that the doors are closed. We still have the cargo doors open, as you can see over here. So now we don't need the GPU, the ground power unit, anymore here, because we have the APU started. You can see here, there we are, heat coming out the back, and that's the APU that is started. So we can go here on the tablet and go on ground services. Now, before we disconnect the GPU, very important, once the APU is started, so you normally do it at the end of this checklist, finish here and you go passenger seated, right? Now, very important that before you remove ground power, you put the airplane on the APU generator bus, otherwise you will lose all power. This is something that you can forget very easily. In this case, you will have a loss of power, you will be only on battery. No panic, the FNC, the FMS stays programmed. In certain airplanes it resets completely the FMS. Here it doesn't. I'll show you what happens. If I disconnect the GPU now, you can see screens are off, red lights everywhere. We lost all power. It's not a big problem. We can now put the airplane on APU generator by clicking these down. Wherever you don't have the light, that's what you're using at the moment. So now we're using the APU generator. The only thing we need to do is reset the master caution. We need to do two things. The yaw damper needs to go back to on, in case you lost electric power, and the auto brake, you need to reset it off, and then RTO. That's all you need to do. You don't lose anything else. At this point we're on APU, so we're good, we're independent, we're not linked to anything anymore. We can close those two doors. Go on to home, ground services, doors, and you can close the cargo doors. All the doors are closed, we're ready to go. So we pre-plan the pushback, we call the pushback track. If you have better pushback, it's freeware, so again,
please show me where you want to go.
Definitely worth having better pushback. It's a simple add-on, you set it up, you can call it by going into your plugins and better pushback and do start pushback or pre-plan. or in the Zibo you have it here, ground service, better pushback. You can pre-plan or request pushback. It's always just easier to do request pushback.
Ground to Cockpit, please show me where you want to go.
Now we need to taxi this way, as we said, you see B7, etc. So what we'll do a pushback this way. We're ready to go. Click there, it's green. And then we
Ground to
press
Cockpit,
enter.
Tau is driving up.
There we are. At this point, before we start, we need to do 3 things. Oh look, this one has been reset. I don't know if it was with the loss of power, but yeah, we need to reset our altitude, 29,000 feet. We need to reset it. It could have been because of, let me check. Let's put back GPU. Disconnect electricity. Oh yes, I didn't notice. So the pressurization altitude goes off as well.
Okay, all
That's
doors and hatches are
extremely,
closed. Ready to connect.
extremely important. You cannot fly with 0 there, because otherwise the cabin would not pressurize and you will simply lose consciousness, which is not really good. There we are, we're already set. So we do 3 things. Anti-collision light goes on. Anti-collision light is a light that needs to be on at all times when the engines are running. So we're about to start the engines, we need to put the anti-collision light. Anti-collision light, you can see out here,
Tau connected and bypass being inserted.
is this
Release
red light.
parking brake.
More importantly for the ground crew is that you see flashing here. So whenever the ground crew sees the red light, they know they need to stay away from the plane, from the engines, because the engines are about to start. This was a cabin crew talking to us. Then next thing we need to do, put this transponder to alt off, so it reports the position of the plane but not in altitude, which you don't need in a moment because they're on the ground. And then to start the engines, what we need is duct pressure. We need the air coming from the APU to start the engines. We need that power coming from the bleed air coming from the APU to start the engine, to start rotating the compressor in the engine, the N2 compressor. Now what you need is to check that you have the APU bleed on and you have pressure. You see, if I put the APU bleed on, you'll have pressure. But if you have the packs on auto, it means that you're using part of the pressure for air conditioning. So you need to have the full pressure available. So you turn the packs off and you can see here the duct pressure is rising. When you have around 40, that's what you need to start the engines. Otherwise you won't be able to start them. Okay? So you check that that has been done. Perfect. So transponder is alt off, anti-collision light is on, and the packs are off. Last bit of the checklist. Below the line, air conditioner is back off, anti-collision light is on, parking brake is set, the transponder is alt off. At this point we can release the parking brake.
Starting pushback, and you may start engines.
There we go, we're moving, we can start the engine. Make sure that you're displaying the engine parameters here, and we call start engine number 2. We start always number 2, which is on the right first. Turn this switch over here to ground, and now we check the N2. At this point we're using that air pressure to spin the N2 compressor, the high pressure compressor. This is starting to spin and is compressing air into the engine. We need to wait until 25%, we can introduce fuel. So we take this fuel valve and we open it. Fuel flow, you can see, is now active, so fuel is getting into the engine. The temperature is rising, so we have combustion. The N2 is spinning further, and now the turbine at the back is receiving the exhaust gas, which is spinning in turn the N1, which is the fan at the front. At 56%, you heard the click. This one goes back to auto, and the light that was the start valve goes closed. It's closed. Now the engine is stabilized. Rule of thumb, Ryanair says 2, 4, 6, 3. So around 20% your N1, which again is your big fan at the front. So this is the
Operation
N1.
complete. Set parking brake.
Set the parking brake. 400
Connecting tow.
the EGT,
Standby.
so the exhaust gas temperature, 400 degrees. And then we have 60, around 60 the N2, and around 0.3 the fuel flow, so 2463. That's good. At this point we can start engine number 1, set to ground. N2 is rising. This is better pushback. We disconnect the tug. Keep your hand on the starter here. Wait for 25 and introduce fuel. In reality, you will keep your hand on the fuel valve here in case you had a hot start or any problems. You could
Tow is
stop the
disconnected
fuel
and
straight
bypass
away.
pin has been removed. Hand signal on the left. We'll see you next time and have a safe flight.
See this one, 50%, 51, 52, 53, 54 and 56. It turns automatically back to auto. No lights here, no yellow lights here, and we're good. Both engines are on and stabilized. At this point, we need to make sure that we remember straight away again to put the power onto the engine generators, because then we will switch off the APU and you will lose power again. So engines onto the generators. Then we follow a flow again panel. Here everything is okay. Here we need to do the last of the red lights. So probe heat on, and these lights go off. You come here, we put the packs back on to auto, so we have air conditioning, the isolation valve to auto, the APU bleed. Now we're going to switch the APU, so we don't need, because we're using bleed air from the engines, and we turn the APU bleed off. The last of the red lights is off. There's no more red lights anywhere here, so we're good to go. At this point we put the engine start switches to continuous just for takeoff, and the APU off. There we go, we're all good to go. You come down from having done that, continue onto your center, so on your thrust lever. They're of course off now. We need to put the flaps to take off. Flaps to 5, flaps indicator is here. We need to put the flaps down 3 notches to 5. There we go. At this point we put the taxi lights and runway turn off lights. So taxi light illuminate in front of us and runway turn off to the side. Well, it's very bright, we don't need, but we don't need to see, but it's part of the procedure. We put the taxi lights and runway turn off lights. At this point we blank this page by pressing engine once and twice. We need to make sure that this is dark, because if there was any problem with the engine, this one would come on. It would be easier to see if from off it goes on all of a sudden. That one is done. We do flight controls. You can check the flight controls on the system page. So you put full forward, full forward, full back, neutral, and you can see all the surfaces moving over here. Full left, full right, neutral, and then we do the rudder, full left, full right, check that your tiller is moving, so that means that you did what I did if you have the twist joystick, and you can move. Make sure, because if you start taxiing and this one is not moving because you haven't configured it properly, then you'll have, well, issues clearly if you cannot make the first turn. There we go. Parking brake off, and we do a very quick config warning test to make sure that we're in the right config by advancing the thrust lever for a split second to 100% and then putting them down to below 40. You cannot have anything. You see this blue tells you where your thrust lever is. You cannot have anything more than 40 on the ground. The 737 doesn't taxi very well on idle power, so you need to start with around 30%. So thrust lever full, there was no beeping, so we're good. We set it to around about 30 to start moving, and once we're moving we can even put it to idle. But there we go. We check that there is nobody left or right, and we're all clear. At this point you can take your airport map up if you have Navigraph, and you have this one, so it tells you where you're. Bit of an easy way of taxiing. The rule for taxiing in terms of speed that you can check over here, the ground speed, you never want to exceed 25 knots. Normally you go 20, 25 maximum when you're going straight. And on turns, if it's a 90 degrees turn, maximum 10 knots. If it's a different turn, not 90 degrees, you can go up to 15. So 25 on straight, unless you're taxiing on a runway, in which case is 30. And then 15 degrees on turn, 15 knots on turn, and 10 knots on 90 degrees turn. Want to accelerate a little bit, I'll go up to 30%. And 1. There we go. At this point, of course, you will check that you're doing everything right. That's why we did a briefing earlier, the taxi briefing. We knew we were going to come here and go to the older point for runway 25 right. Try and keep your center line in the 737. The center line, you're in the center line when this yellow line, the taxi line, is in between these two switches. So now we're at 20 knots, so I put back to idle, and we can keep rolling. Taxi line in the middle, we're on the taxi line. There we are. We can now do call for the before takeoff checklist. Oh, I forgot the before taxi checklist. Very bad of me. Sorry, after more than an hour of cold and dark, probably at least by now, I was very keen to leave. The generators, yeah, this is important to do, especially at the beginning, when you fly for the first times, because there's quite some vital things to do. So let's stop a second here and do that. So you have your generators are on, so we put the generators on the engine. The APU is off. Here it's empty because in certain circumstances you can take off with the APU still being on. If you need to do a short runway departure, for example. So that's why it's white. But you know whether you need it off or on, and just you call for what you have. APU off, start switches are continuous. Anti-ice is not needed today because we are in Spain and it's nice and toasty. Flaps 5 required, 5 selected. So 5 required, 5 selected, green light. Start trim 4.5 units, 4.5 set. Start lever idle detent. Flight controls have been checked and they recall. So this one has been checked. When you click this one, if there was an issue, electric or hydraulic or anything, one of these will stay on. If nothing stays on, it means there are no issues. There we are. We continue taxi. We're about to cross an active runway. You can see the lights flashing. You can see the designation of the runway there, and you can see this continuous yellow line on our side. If the dotted is on your side, you can cross it. If the solid line is on your side, you shouldn't cross it. In this case, we would ask ATC authorization to cross it. If they told us cross runway 20, we would then put the strobe light on for more visibility. The strobe is that bright yellow light on the side of the over here. This is really visible.
20.
Cross there, we cleared right and we cleared left. And there we go. Strobe lights can go back off until we're onto our runway. So at this point we can do a before takeoff checklist, which will be over here. So the checklist is on paper as long as you, let's say, don't need your hands and your low workload, you're not flying. After that, it turns on to here. You have it on your yoke, so you have it in front of you. So we can do a few items here. So the configuration has been checked of the plane. The flaps are 5, green light. The stub trim is 4.5 units and we set it. The takeoff briefing has been reviewed. We've done the takeoff briefing. The cabin is secure, so we close the door and everybody's sat down and we're good. The MCP, so mode control panel here, has been set. We can set the LNAV now as you're taxiing, because this is a GPS procedure, an LNAV procedure. You could use heading if you had a more manually configured departure, or LNAV if you're using your GPS navigation for the departure. Transponder, no, for this one we wait, because these 3 last actions we do them once we enter the runway. Anyway, as we said again, flashing lights, solid yellow line, we need to stop before that. Normally here we would wait for air traffic controller to tell us that we're cleared for takeoff from runway 25 right. When we get our clearance, we check a few things. We need to do a little flow. Go up on the overhead, strobe goes to steady, so we have the strobe lights, landing lights go on, and the taxi light goes off. We keep the runway turn off. Here on the MCP, we need to make sure that we put the auto thrust to arm, so we have auto thrust. We put the weather radar on for the captain. Unless it was if it was a beautiful day like today, and there was a lot of terrain around, like in Innsbruck or mountains, we would choose to use the terrain radar. Today is beautiful and flat, so we don't need either of them, but standard we put the weather radar. And then we come down and we put the transponder to TARA. So from now we start reporting, sending out information as well about our altitude that ATC needs. Brakes go off and we start aligning on the runway. So the last items were transponder, TARA, strobe lights are on and landing lights are on.
Approaching 25 right.
Try and align on the center line. There, always try and use as much runway as you have. Okay, we'll stop here and we'll go through all the actions that we need to do, because it's a very, very busy moment in terms of workload, the takeoff. So we'll just review quickly what we have to do. There we are. So in terms of takeoff procedure, so what we're going to do, we're going to first of all increase the power to 40% and let the engines stabilize at 40%. In reality, based on wind and etc., there might be different time it takes the engines to stabilize, so we want to make sure that before applying full power they're stable at 40. When they're stable at 40, we press the toga button. So you can, it's very difficult, you can either press this one, or a bit easier to press the N1 button over here. That will increase automatically the throttle levers, and then you will have takeoff power set. So that means that the takeoff power will be automatically set to what is here in the green, 95.4. Once that is set, I have a button on the joystick set for that, for the toga. Once that is set, we check, reconfirm that it's set. It needs to be set by 80 knots. The speed will reach 80 knots. You will hear a call out. That's the pilot monitoring calling 80 knots. By that time, we need to check that the takeoff thrust is set. Until that point, we will be holding a half forward pressure, a light forward pressure, to make sure that the nose wheel stays nice in contact with the ground. At 80 knots, we release that forward pressure. Then the pilot monitoring will call V1. V1 we know we cannot reject anymore, and then VR, they're very close, we know 134, 136. VR, we will pull the column back towards us, roughly 1/3 to half of the way, and we'll have the flight directors at the point guiding us. We will need to take this middle point up to the middle of the cross of the flight directors. That needs to happen around 2.5 to 3 degrees per second, so we will be pitching up to 15 degrees roughly. So from 0 to 15 degrees you need to be smooth, and do that in around 5 seconds. Okay, we need to take you around 5-second count. As soon as you start pulling, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you should be there. Cannot be too fast or it cannot be too slow. Bear in mind that around 10 degrees you'll have a little dead zone because of the way the airplane will be pitching up. Around 10 degrees the airflow that the stabilizer, which is what makes you lift the nose, receives, is covered by the wing. So at 10 degrees you might feel that it's a little bit difficult, you need to pull a little bit more. Once you're on the flight directors, the pilot monitoring will call positive rate, which is positive rate of climb, and you can check by this line will start pointing up. It means that we're going up. We will call gear up, and we will set the gear to up. Next goal is 400 feet. 400 feet above airfield, above ground. We check only nothing, we do nothing, but we check that we have LNAV or heading selected activated according to what we need. In this case LNAV, and you can see it's here. LNAV is selected, we'll keep flying manually, and the next goal will be 1000 feet. At 1000 feet above airfield we will be trimmed by that point, so you need to make sure that by 1000 feet you're using your trim so that you don't need to hold the column. Now normally you need to hold it back towards you to hold that 15 degrees, so what you need to do, you need to hold it to hold 15 degrees and then trim, use the trim up to hold the attitude without having to touch your joystick. Once you're in trim at 1000 feet call, we arm the autopilot, or not, depends if you want to fly manually, but normally we would arm the autopilot So press Command A, which is our autopilot on the left side, and we say bug up. So we move this bug to the flaps up speed, which will be around 210, depends on our weight. So we move this one to coincide, and then we can start retracting the flaps. But now let's do this. Let's go. Parking brake is off. Spool up 40%. Stable at 40. Toga set. Takeoff thrust we call. We can see this matches. Takeoff thrust is set before 80. We're holding the pressure down a little, trying to keep the center line with the rudder.
80 knots.
Checked. We say checked that 80 knots was correct. Relieve the forward pressure.
E1, rotate.
Rotate smoothly. Up to 15 degrees, positive rate, gear up. Try and stay in the center of the cross. Trim that we stay there.
400.
There we are, now not touching the joystick. 400, we check LNAV is selected. You can see the engines has pulled down. 1000. Now we cannot activate the autopilot if we're touching the joystick in any way, so make sure you trim, you press Command A, and you see the autopilot is active now. MCP speed, LNAV, and 1. Now we need to bug up. You see this up on the speed tape, that's when we rotate this knob, we have this sign there, and we need to make it coincide with up speed, which is 209. At this point the airplane starts accelerating, as you see. Once we are past this green bug with positive speed trend, we can put the flaps to 1, and once we pass the 1, we can set them to up. We pass the 1, it's a bit confusing, but we pass 1, we do the next flap state, which is up. At this point we have the flaps up. We keep the speed until we're at 3000 feet above airfield, at which point you'll hear the engines pulling up. You see we're at 84.5. At 3000 feet spools back up 87.4. So now we are in climb thrust. At this point we can set VNAV, which means the speed will be automatically controlled by everything we set in the FMS over here. So at this point we set speed at 250 because that's the usual restriction below 10,000 feet. It's always 250. And you can see, because if you go onto the climb page, so on departure you should have the climb page and the pilot monitoring the legs page. If you come here, the things in magenta are the things that we are expecting. So at the moment we're making sure that we're not going, though the next restriction will be above 14,000, which is what we said. Again, we briefed it, so we know it's there. It's the NDB, and we're obeying the 250 below 10,000 restriction. Now we can do the after takeoff action, so we put this one back to off, making sure you don't go down. 1000 to go. You heard in Collie, so you're close to the altitude we set, so we can set our next altitude. Let's put it at 15,000 now, so we have a little bit of time before we level off. We passed the transition altitude that was at 6,000 feet, so we can put altimeter to standard. Altimeter standard, 1, 2, and 3. So we said we put the gear off, auto brake off, start switches go back to auto. Oh, we didn't set the cabin crew, you see, all the things that we said. Cabin crew should have been sat, so the chime is down, and now we could release the cabin crew and put it to off. And we've done all that, so after takeoff, air conditioner pressurization is working. You can see this is rising, so it's pressurizing the cabin. Engine start switches to auto, landing gear is up and off, the auto brake is off, the flaps are up with no lights, and the altimeters have been set. We're now approaching 10,000 feet, at which point we turn all our lights off, the landing lights, and then turn off lights. Above 10,000, you see that restriction at 250 is gone, so it's not targeting that 250, but it's now targeting the actual climb speed, which is 285. So it's now pitching down and accelerating. So you're slowing your climb, but that's normal because you're just accelerating, and then we'll start climbing again. At this point we can set our final altitude, which we want to check. Here on the climb page is 290. So we'll set 290 and we check it 3 times. So one is set here, this is what it says in the FNC, and whenever you set something here, don't look here but always look at the PFD to see if I move the knob, this altitude is moving. You never want to trust what is set on the FNCP. You want to trust what is shown on the PFD and your pilot monitor. That's what the airplane is going to do. And then the third time is your pressurization panel, 29,000. So 1, 2, 3 times checked. At this point we're above 10,000 feet, we can release the passengers. So seat belts off, and they can go about their business. I'm using for Spain a freeware Spain Ultra HD Ortos that you can find online. It's quite chunky, it's 300 gigabytes, but it's absolutely worth it. It's beautiful, every single part of Spain. There we are, now we're climbing. Well, 10,000 feet will do normally as well. We would do what they call 10 checks. So at 10,000 feet you check that your lights are off, your APU is off, your fasten seatbelts however you want them, and you check the pressurization panel, the pressure is rising, and then you do recall and you're good. In reality, every 10,000 feet the pilot monitoring checks the pressurization. You can see the cabin altitude now is 6,000 feet. It's okay, the cabin altitude is never, it's always lower than your actual altitude. You cannot, of course, but needless to say, pressurize the airplane to be the same as the actual altitude, otherwise you'd have problems. There we go. Now there's not much to do until you're cruising. You can check here, turn the knob to have a bit more range around you, so you can see this green line, the arc, is where the airplane is predicting is going to level off, and the top of climb is what, well, that is your top of climb. TC is your top of climb. If you have a flight plan short enough, you can see that here we have the top of descent. So all the greens are all action, so top of climb, then we'll have the top of descent there. This is the deceleration point, and this is the bottom of descent at the airfield where you arrive. At this point you can check a few things. You can go on the FNC and you can check on your progress page that the fuel is gonna be enough. So it's 2.9, so technically we're burning a bit more fuel than we should have. We should have landed with 3.1. It's predicting that at arrival we're gonna have 2.9. It's telling you the time of arrival, 12:21, so you can check against your clock. That's 11:37, so we have 45 minutes of cruise. And then on the cruise page here, this is very useful, it tells you how long to the top of descent. So onto the cruise page, you see again the fuel at arrival, destination, and top of descent, 165 miles. So at 12 o'clock, there we have 22 minutes. Should give us enough time to go through all the things that we need to do. Now, at the top of climb, the airplane will descend automatically as long as you have the altitude set below what you have now. So now we cannot move this altitude because we haven't reached it yet. We'll need to change that once we are at our cruise altitude. What we can do first, we can start gathering information about the arrival, so we can get rid of our charts for Barcelona. We have Santander there. We can start taking them in order. So first, the arrival. So we said that the arrival was going to be there we are. Bravo Lima Victor 5 Echo. So Bilbao 5 Echo. Yeah, sometimes of course the name is an acronym in there, sort of, and this will be different, but Bilbao 5 Echo. Then the approach, we said it's going to be ILS Z runway 29. Then we take the airport chart, airport parking, and then lastly we do our airport. Well, parking is already there because it's a small airport, so the parking is already included in this chart. At bigger airports you have a separate parking stand, or you can have different terminals, so it can be more complicated. It's a very small airport, and we start briefing and double checking our arrival. So first of all, we need to check on the FNC that it does make sense and we know what we're doing. So LRD, let's see, the first point of our arrival is going to be BLV. So we could have come from the south, or from here. We're coming from this side. You can see BLV here, and BLV is over here, Bilbao. After BLV, we're going to go to Norvi. So you see, these are of course different procedures according to what kind of approach you do. In this case, we're going to Norvi. 1,000 to go. In reality, here we're climbing quite fast, 1,500 feet per minute. In real life, they would put vertical speed and reduce vertical speed to 1,000 to make sure that you do a more gentle level off. So instead of keeping VNAV, you put vertical speed and do 1,000 feet. Even in VNAV, it would be quite gentle, but that's something that Ryanair does as part of their SOP. You can do that, you level off, and you can revert to VNAV at this point. So we're checking the BLV for Norvi. There are no constraints here, otherwise you would check, of course, the constraints. Many arrival have constraints in terms of speed, in terms of altitude, so you need to check them all. Then we go into Ampur. You can check it as well while being on the flight plan view. There we go, BLV, and then we go to Norvi, then we go to Ampur, then to Sorpo, and then we're gonna have the approach. At this point, this is the center fix, so this is part of the approach plate. The approach is going to be, you can see we have Ampur, Sorpo, and then the center fix. Center fix is going to be here, and then 9.7 from STA. 9.7 from STA. That's the 9.7 to the runway. That's your final approach fix, center fix and final approach fix. That's the top of your glide slope. We check the speeds as well. So we know that at Sorbo, what is it? Sorbo, we know that we're 17 km, so that's far enough to be right a reasonable speed. So it's a fairly slow final approach. So it's fine. The important thing is that when we start the final glide slope, will be slow enough, because we'll start descending quite steep. We need to make sure that we're low enough. If you had the final fix here and you had the speed of 200 knots set in the NCP, you know that's way too fast. But you could potentially, but with some flaps to slow you down, but you want to be slow. This is all trial and error. You need to have a little bit of experience. Sometimes it's very long. Sometimes the glide slope can be, I don't know, 15 miles long, so you can start at 200, which is a little bit of flaps to slow you down. But if it starts at only 4, sometimes it starts only at 4 miles from the runway, so you need to be at that. In that case, you need to be full flaps 15 and gear down already. So different configurations. Zibo tends to be exceptionally good at setting the speed, so you can almost trust it blindly. Always double check anyway. So we know we're going to be here at 9.7, we're going to intercept the glide slope, we're going to be at 158, so at that point we'll be already, it's a bit early to be geared down at plus 15, but we could be. We'll see when we get there. Or I'll show you actually more what was a bit faster. We'll start maybe around 180, not with all the flaps, and then we'll put gear down at plus 15 at 40. We check this one. While we're here, we check a few things. Let's start actually configuring the FNC. Normally you would make sure that you start doing what I'm gonna start now around 60 miles from top of descent. As I'm explaining it now, I'll start a little earlier. So first thing, what we're gonna do, we're going to go on to where are we gonna start? We're gonna start from the descent. So descent page there, and we have the forecast. Descent page, forecast. We need to tell the airplane the winds ahead of us when we're gonna start descending. So we take our plan, we scroll pages until you have all your waypoints here that you can see. At the end of the waypoints you have this section with the winds, wind information. What we need is the descent winds. We need to put 2 or 3 levels below us, depends on how high we're flying. If we're above 30,000 feet, we put 3 levels. If we're below that, we put 2 levels. So we can put 200 and 100. 200 here, 100 here, and then we put the speed. 200 is 259 at 16. 100 and 266 at 11. Next thing, we want the QNH on arrival, which we check from where we would normally check from our from this page. So at the bottom, I need to check it on Active Sky. So Active Sky Santander 1021. We do the slashes after the slash, so slash 1021. We can put as well the deviation from ISA. The standard temperature ISA is 15 degrees. The airport on arrival is 19, so we have a +4 degrees. We need to put together with the QNH. 1020 actually just changed. There we go. Make sure you don't do it too early and then you check it closer, because it changes every hour, around 50 minutes past the hour, so that QNH could change. We have ISA, we have QNH, we have the wind speeds. You can execute that. make sure that now that you receive your QNH, you're preset it and you don't forget it. So yeah, I'm struggling a little bit with frames at the moment. That's mainly because I'm streaming and I have Orthos and I have X-Europe and tons of add-ons, so I'm making it work. Now 1020, you can preset your QNH without changing it by keeping it on standard and move this knob. You see it's in white, but it still says standard, so it's sort of armed, pre-armed there. Preset it everywhere. It is standard procedure to already change it on the standby. We have a reminder and we know how much difference. Can be big differences in altitude. So like we know that here we're indicating 29,000, but actually we're 200 feet higher than that. It's good to know that, because if there's, you need to change your altimeter back to the QNH at your transition altitude. Especially in Europe, sometimes the transition altitude can be very low. If the transition altitude was at 5,000 feet, you would be already quite close to the airport. If it was a day with very high pressure, like 1030, the difference could be a lot. You see, 360 feet. So as you're approaching the airport, you want to make sure you consider that, because all of a sudden when you switch your altimeters, you can find yourself very high. Well, that's why we preset it here. 1020, 1020, and it's preset everywhere. So that's been done. Now the next step, we go on to our legs page. For the vast majority of approaches, you will find a waypoint here that is called runway, whichever runway you're landing. If it isn't there, it's because it's a procedure like a VOR procedure that doesn't take you down to the runway and you need to enter it manually. But if you have it there, what you do, you just click onto it, you copy onto your scratch pad, then you open the fix page. So here you're creating a fix, a point onto your navigation display, which in this case is the threshold, so the start of the runway 29 at Santander. From that point we want to create certain navigational aids, something to help us as a reminder. Ryanair sets as default a ring. Now if you put a number before and then a slash, from that point, let me see if I can show you. Yeah, you see, this is the point. This is our fix. If you set a number before the slash and you put it there, this is going to be a radial. So for example, to see it better, 040, this is going to be a radial coming out of that fix. So we know that this is a radial moving towards 040 degrees from the threshold of that runway. So this can be useful in many circumstances to do extended center lines or situational awareness and etc. So you can create these, especially to see certain MSA like minimum safe altitude and so forth and so on. In this case we need, instead of radials, we need radiuses. So we put the number after the slash. So we will slash 10, and this is going to create a circle, a radius of 10 miles around that point. The 10 miles one is just a reminder that we need to have some sort of flaps at that point. 10 miles from the airport, we want to have at least flaps 1. Then we do a 4 or 5 is when we're going to put the gear down and the flaps to 15, closer to the airport. At the beginning I would set it to 5 when you start flying the plane, just to give yourself a little bit more time. And then you do a check of your top of descent. Speaking of which, we want to set that speed. Remember to set that altitude lower. Now set top of descent 29 times 3, So you multiply your altitude in thousands of feet by 3. So 29 times 3, that's 87 plus 10 miles to decelerate. So 97 miles. And we put it there. Oh, sorry, I put it on top of the 4. Need to put it as a last fix. So 97. There we are. As you can see now on the ND, that's the 97 ring and that's the top of descent. And then almost coincide, so that means that it's very accurate. If we had a very long procedure, like if we were going that way and the airport, what is it? The airport was here, but you needed to do a long procedure behind the airport and then come back, then of course the top of descent would be further ahead. Then next thing we do, we go onto the progress page. We check how much fuel we still have to burn. In this case, this is the current fuel, 3.8. This is the fuel on arrival at Lexia. We know we need to burn another 0.8, 800 kilos. Now we go into the init ref. This is the gross weight at the moment. This is the approach reference. So here we'll set the speed at the final speed at which we will approach based on what flaps we need, but we need to tell it first what weight we're going to be at before it can calculate. So 61.8 minus 0.8 is going to be 61.0. We put it there. At this point you can calculate the speed. It's a very short runway, so we'll definitely do a 40 flaps 40. If it was a long runway you could use a 30. So you click here once and then you click it twice and it's activated here. You need to make sure that it's activated here and that it's showing here to know that it's correct. That is going to be our final approach speed, flaps 40 at 136 knots. Here there's a reminder of the length of the runway. So what we're doing, we're checking a few things as we see that. Length on the runway as a reminder, so it's making us think what auto brake we might want to put. Short runway, we need to set the auto brake now. We'll put them to 3 for such a short runway. Then another thing that we'll need to look onto this plate is the final altitude, the glide loss intercepts altitude. Now normally in real life, if you were on VATSIM or on air traffic controllers, you wouldn't set that because they would tell you first descend to 20,000 feet, 10,000 feet and so forth. If you're not online, you can set directly your final intercept altitude. So we go down to 3,200, we will have intercepted already. Make sure this is there, because otherwise the plane will not start descending. Another thing you want to check is the minimums. So every approach has different minimums. In this case, you always check them. They're normally here on the bottom left. Cat C is what a 737 is. It's category C. Minimum altitude at which you need to be visual with the runway to be able to continue the approach. So this is an ILS, so it's a very low altitude because it's a precision approach. You're guided down to the runway. For non-precision, this might be a lot higher. So you need to set this one 367. That is the barometric altitude. This is the radio altitude. We always use barometric altitude. 367, we need to set it here. We use this one, the same thing as before. So we just reset it and then put it up to 367. And you do the same as well for the first officer. There we are, 367 is set, 367 is set. And we double check, the altitude is set, the minimums are set, and the final approach speed is set. So we're good. We'll just review the whole procedure, so we'll do a little briefing so we know we're using this arrival, and we've already checked that everything was good. So we know we're gonna be passing Ampur and then Sorpo, and then at 9.7 miles from the runway threshold, we're going to intercept at 3,200 feet the glide slope. The missed approach procedure is to climb on 292, so straight ahead, runway heading to the VOR. Then we proceed after the VOR to 4,000 feet. Well, with 4,000 feet we turn right back to the VOR, climbing to 6,000 feet and joining this holding over here. We need to make sure that we memorize this, because in case we go around we need to know, remember of course by heart, what we need to do. Good practice is, as you're flying, to always synchronize your heading bag with the direction you're going. So if you had ATC, if you were online and you had air traffic controllers telling you to turn left to 270 degrees, it would be very easy to come here, start turning it left, and you see you get to 270 degrees. If you abandon this one and you didn't move it, ATC told you to turn left, it would be a lot more complicated to get there. Okay. So just a little finesse is good to always synchronize the heading. So we're nearly top of descent. You can wait until top of descent normally. It's normally what you do, you let it descend automatically. Or you can now the 737 is a little bit fast descending, so very often you need some speed brakes on descent. It tends to increase speed. If you want to reduce the likelihood of it doing that, you can use this button, descend now. Now if you don't touch it, the airplane will automatically, when it gets to the top of the descent, reduce the thrust and automatically descend. If you want to have a slightly smoother descent, a little earlier, around 5 miles, you can press the descent now. At the point it will start descending a little bit more gently. But let's see what happens when it does it automatically. So you've set everything. So you've checked the descent. So we checked all the constraints and everything. The approach. We set we need to set the frequency. That's the last thing we need to do. So you see descent. We can do that checklist. Landing altitude is correct. The anti-ice is not needed today. The approach, briefing and fuel is discussed. And yes, an altitude bag. The altitude bag is set. In terms of fuel, yeah, you can do that check. You can check on your progress page. That is now enough. See, it was 2.9, now it's 3.1. So we have enough fuel for the diversion. So we know that in case we need to do a go around, we'll have enough fuel for the diversion. And then last thing we need to do, which is very, very important, and we can do it at the same time as we check this plate where we checked the altitude and the minimums, check the frequency. So this is the ILS frequency, is 110.9. Move this one to ILS because it's an ILS. 110.9. 110.9, and you activate it in both seats. Check it, double check it, and check it as well on the init ref page. 110.9, and the course is 291. Sometimes it might differ from the charts and what Zibo has in the database. It doesn't really matter, you can put either. And we set the course here, 291 and 291. So it's absolutely vital that this is preset, otherwise the plane will not land, will not capture the ILS. Let's check. We need to put the seat belts back on around 15,000 feet. And then there will be nothing to do until 10,000 feet. At 10,000 feet, we'll just keep monitoring the speed and never abandon it. As I said, this Zibo today is behaving, but normally tends to be quite fast, so you need to make sure that you're controlling that. If you see the speed increasing above the bug, the magenta bug, you can use a little bit of speed brake. Not full. Normally, half of it is enough. But of course, now it's not needed, so we put them back up or down. Then at 10,000 feet, we will need to remember to put the landing lights on. And at transition altitude, which is, we can check here, should be the same. Transition altitude 6,000 feet, we will need to set the altimeters. And at that point, we can do the approach checklist, which is very quick. It's only altimeters set and the approach aids set, so your ILS. But definitely you want your ILS to be set already when you're at top of descent, before that. We can recheck here as well what we're gonna do. So now heading for BLV, we're 30 miles to BLV, which again is a VOR. So if we wanted, you could visualize it, like you could put it there and make it active. And at that point, if you set VOR2 here, you will have it on your display. See, VOR 29 miles, which is exactly the same as here. Just again, situational awareness, cross-checking that everything is good. And we'll put back to our ILS. While you're descending, keep double checking that you set everything. Your minimums was done, your approach speed was done, the altimeters are preset, the auto brake is RTO. Now there is an option, there is a landing distance calculator, which is really handy here. So you can go while you're descending, fuel weight and balance, performance landing, and you can check everything. Airport is already filled automatically from your FMC. Runway, we said we're going to use 29. This one you leave it. Condition is dry. Winds, you take them from your ATIS report. So in this case 080 at 03. Also, winds from 080. So that means that technically I should change runway now. You see the winds have changed, so now they're coming from 080. So at this point that I should change runway. As this one is the first flight, I'm not gonna do it because it might be a bit complicated for the first flight. It's only 3 knots, so it's not really a problem. See, the speed is increasing a little bit, so you can put a little bit of spoilers. So we'll keep 29 and we'll put 080 at 3. Temperature, we said it was going to be 19. QNH is 1020. Weight, we said it was going to be 61 tons. Flaps is going to be 40. Airborne auto. Anti-ice is going to be off. The brakes, we use everything, and that's it. Everything else stays the same. If you go on the second page now, it shows you where are you going to stop with each set of auto brakes. So auto brakes 1, we wouldn't make it. 2 would be very close. That's why I said 3. That's manual auto, max auto brake. So the max or max manual if you were just to step on the brake. It's fine. 3 gives us around 2/3 of the runway of use, which means that we're coming out comfortably by Yankee 3. Let's again something you brief. So we're gonna land 29, we're gonna use auto brakes 3, we'll come out Yankee 3 and then taxi back to the terminal via Bravo. And we can decide where we're going to park as well. We'd always brief as well all the arrival and everything out to the gate. So let's say we're gonna taxi onto stand 2. We just need to come straight to Bravo and taxi on stand 2. To say that Sim Heaven X Europe, so all the buildings, this is an add-on called Sim Heaven X Europe that pretty much like Flight Simulator 2020 does now. It checks on the maps the size and shape of the buildings and then creates buildings true to real life. Of course the colors might not be identical, the elevation might not be identical, but see how much many buildings there are. It's absolutely fantastic, but at the same time very heavy on FPS. There we passed 15,000 feet, so we can put the fasten seatbelts on. Also, if you want, you can do your PAs, you can do your descent, PA, prepare for landing, and etc. I normally don't do it, but if you open your door, you can hear them.
We'll be touching down in less than 30 minutes, so do make your way.
This is probably Bilbao. Bilbao, yeah. The Santander is just slightly west of Bilbao. There we go. Anyway, we're descending, we're approaching 10,000 feet. We need to be below 250 knots, below 10,000 feet. That's why you have this deceleration point over here. Just need to check that the airplane is going to respect that. If you are on your descent page, you see the airplane now is targeting 255, which is the descent speed is set for itself. And then it will revert to the constraint. Always assess the situation in terms of needing for anti-ice, below 10 degrees, into clouds, into visible humidity, you want to have your anti-ice on. So we're now at 10 degrees, it's a little bit of clouds, but that's not a concern. If we were at 5 degrees and I was flying into these clouds, I would put the anti-ice, wing and engine anti-ice on. As you can see, we passed the deceleration point, so the airplane is now targeting 240 below 10,000 feet and is slowing down nicely. This is the profile. Sorry, I didn't tell you about the profile earlier. This little, well, first let's put the landing lights on. 10,000 feet. Landing lights and runway terminal flights. This is the profile. So the profile you can check in 3 different ways. Whether you are on the vertical profile, let's say, the same profile that the airplane is following. You can check it here, as long as this little square is in the middle. You can check it here, this one is here, and you can check it on the descent page. So this one tells you that your own profile. If you were below the profile, this one would go up. You know, you will be too low, which is not a big problem. If it was a lot below you, it means you're high and you're too late descending. If you were above profile, simplest way to regain it is just to keep it on VNAV and you add the speed brakes. Might mean that you're fast, so it cannot descend fast enough, so you use your speed brake to descend faster. There are other ways, but we won't go through them today. If you were really high, instead of using VNAV, you could use a level change. So at that point, it wouldn't follow a profile, it would follow just the speed. You would do level change, set the speed very fast, so you can use the drag that speed generates and slow down even quicker, but we won't go through it today. Here it tells you as well the number, so it's a 8 feet low on profile, so that's perfect. Bang on profile. Check the speed is creeping up. You see 247, so you don't want to be above 248. It's setting 240, so might want to use a little bit of speed brake. There we are, around 20 miles. Normally happens a bit earlier, I believe, but the DME from the ILS is tuned now, so it's appearing here on the top left corner. So now you know you're 20 miles from the airport. On the legs page, you see that the next speed that we're now targeting is Wi-Fi 7 for the final approach speed. You see that the bug, the magenta bug, is now set on the up speed. So before FI, we want to have lost a lot of speed. That the computer now knows we are not losing. You see, the speed is stable. So what we can do, we can put the spoilers up and start, and we will start descending. Now we're already on runway heading, so we want to set that one as well. We know it's 290. We are below 6,000 feet, so at this point we set the altimeters. Click on standard, click in the middle, and they're all set. You see the altimeter changed, so we're a little high. We'll now slow down. Transition altitude, we set the altimeters and we check the approach checklist. Altimeter and instrument, they set and cross checked, so they're all three on 1020, and the approach aids have been set. We've checked them already a couple of times. ILS is set, the course is 291. The runway heading is checked here, is 291, and we set the runway heading as well on the heading bug to 291 in case we need to revert to heading select. We're now descending below 250. As you can see here, we can use flaps 1, 2 and 5. So at this point, to help us slow down, we'll set flaps 5. We can open the speed window, we can let it target it automatically, or we can at this point don't know why the airplane is turning, but we're recovering. That was weird. I pressed approach. Okay, we need to try and slow down. We open the speed intervention, so instead of letting the computer set the speed, we're setting it manually. We set it to 7.5 for now. We are high now. I don't know why this happened. The plane should have descended to 3,000 feet. But it didn't. And you can see your runway there. And you can see that we have 4 white puppies, so we're not in a good position to descend. We're too high. So let's troubleshoot this one. Let's revert to heading. doing something weird with the altitude. Let's set altitude hold. So we try and hold the altitude we have now. Turn back on our track. Let's do a 180 degrees turn. So you see I pressed altitude hold, which means you stop at the altitude you are, whichever that is. And I pressed heading select and selected the heading manually. The speed is 175. You can keep that. Here the speed tape, it tells you the maximum speed with those flaps. So here you can even see it's 250. You can double check it there, so you know you can go up to 250. We'll speed up a little bit, and your minimum speed is here. The suggested speed is indicated by the screen number, so at 5 degrees of flaps. Should put there, but we want to be a little faster, do this a little quicker. There was a little bug on the flight plan, on the vertical and lateral deviation. You saw the plane started turning left. So that's why it's always good to know what you're supposed to do and being able to intervene. Now we know that we want to be here at FI29Z, which is this one. We want to be at 3,250. So let's start working towards that. Start descending towards 4,000. We're 4,600. We set 4,000 and we do vertical speed. And we start descending. Vertical speed, try and normally not put it more than 3 degrees, so you know you're not accelerating at the same time. 3 degrees means that you check your ground speed, this one, and 5 times this ground speed, or half of this ground speed plus 0, is your 3%. So in this case, half is quite easy. That's 100 plus 0, 1,000 feet per minute. We have mountains ahead of us. I'm going to try and turn early. Let's do another 180 degrees turn now. Not exactly 130, so the final heading is 290. We want to intercept this track before FI, before that point. So we'll keep descending to 3,200. We put vertical speed again, and then we leave 30 degrees. Instead of 291, we do 261. So you see we're intersecting before that final approach phase. At this point we start monitoring these points. So this is the lateral intercept of the ILS, and this is the glide slope. So this one is now alive. So when this one is alive, is solid, we can press VOR lock. Once VOR lock is engaged, the plane will automatically intercept this lateral path. VOR lock is active here, so we know that the plane is on localizer. Altitude acquired, it means that we reached the 3,200 that we set. So now we need to try and intercept the glide slope. Check this one. This one is now solid, so this one is now alive. So we can now click approach, and you see that the glide slope now is armed, white, not captured yet, but armed. So we know we're getting there. We can slow down to the speed that we wanted to be at, 156. be a 156. It's below the 5, so we need to have more flaps. So we put flaps. Actually, we leave it there because we're quite far. We're still at 10 miles. So we leave the speed where it is. There we go. Glide slope is now boxed. So it means we intersected the glide slope. And the plane is flying ILS for lateral and vertical. We set our 6,000 feet for the missed approach altitude because now we're on glide slope, so this one doesn't do anything anymore, so we can set the 6,000 feet for the missed approach altitude. Now next thing we're gonna do, we set that at 5 miles, so this ring here, 4 miles, we were gonna put gear down in flaps 15. Do it a little earlier so we have time to talk about all the steps. At this point we resynchronize our heading 291. Whenever we put the notch of flaps down, then we need to move the speed back to match what comes here on the speed tape. We'll do it in a minute. We're at 6 miles, 6.7. Let's put gear down. So we put gear down, flaps. We put 15, and you see the 15 is up here there. So we wind down the speed to that bug, 156. At this point we have authorization to land. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna set the taxi lights on. Because we've been authorized clear to land. We seat the cabin crew. We turn the engine start to continuous. And then we continue with the flaps. We now set flaps 30. And we set our final speed, which is 136 plus 5. So we set 141. We set the flaps to 40. And we go 136, 141 is set here, and that's it. Finally, we arm the speed brake, so we bring back to 0, click with the button on the keyboard 1 notch here, and the speed brake is armed. So at this point we check landing checklist, start switch is put to continuous, recall checked. Speed brake is armed, green light, landing gear down, 3 green. Auto brake set, 3, flaps 40 for the plan, 40 set, green light, landing lights are on. We're good to go. At this point we'll only need to deactivate the auto throttle. So we deactivate the auto throttle by pressing 2 times here, and then we match this thrust with what it was before we deactivate it, and then we deactivate the autopilot by clicking once, and after 1 second clicking twice. At this point we take control and we try and follow the flight directors and making sure that we are on glide slope, but mostly now we look out, making sure we keep 2 white and 2 red puppies. If it's more red lights we're too low, more white lights we're too high. Try and stay on center line and aim for the landing zone. Check that the speed is correct.
50, 40,
30.
20,
Pull up.
10.
Thrust lever to 0. Hold that attitude and touchdown. Activate the reversers on full. Check that the auto brake is working. Below 80 knots we can put the reversers to idle. Touch the brakes so it deactivates the auto brakes. Set the auto brake to off and finish braking manually. We stow the reversers, so we deactivate the reversers, making sure that from green they go yellow and then nothing.
We hope you enjoyed yours,
and we look forward to welcoming you on board again soon.
And there we go.
Low fares, made simple.
Start the speed brakes. The flaps go up.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're all very welcome to this airport. For your own comfort and safety, please remain seated with your seatbelt secured.
Once we pass this line and we've vacated the runway, a few things. We put the landing lights off. In this case we can turn the runway turn off, we can put them off. That's nice and bright. We can put the transponder to alt off, weather radar to off, start switches they go back to auto, pro beat goes to off, and the strobe we put off to nav light. We can start the APU. Flight directors goes off. The speed bar goes back to 100. And the trim, we reset it to the minimum 2024. There we go. Embark on stand 2. So this is a freeware add-on airport. It's fantastic, made by, for me, for European airports is genius, and TDG is called on the forum. It makes a fantastic airport. Taxi lights now go off, so we don't blind anybody on the ground. We have the marshal there telling us how to steer. Normally you don't, you have only add-on airports. Of course it's the same, so you can check what we're doing here. That was a difficult maneuver here. There we go, working brake. At this point the APU is running, so we can put power on the APU and we turn the engines off. While the engines are spooling down, release the crew and the fasten seatbelts. And when the below 20%, we put the anti-collision light to off. Hola, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Santander. A bit of an eventful landing, very strange. The it made that turn and it got confused. I have no idea what that happened, to be honest. Everything was, we double checked it was all configured correctly on the FNC, and I've just finished the European tour and I did 25 flights on this plane and not once it had a single issue, but in a way it was good that it did, so we learned something different. Normally all it does, once you're close to the ILS, you see these little signs over here that they're empty now. That tells you if you're approaching your ILS, and normally when they go solid, you just then, if you have a right descent profile, you're normally below this one, which means you're good. Once you intercept this one and it goes solid, you press board lock and the airplane will intercept it. And once this one is solid, you press approach and the airplane re-intercepts that. And that's all you do normally, you have nothing else to do. But yeah, it was a bit more fun this time. And that's it. I won't go through the shutdown procedure. That's the easiest part. Thank you very much, everybody, for watching the video, especially if you made it to the end. Hopefully in a few times, not all together. And this is where I landed last year for my holidays, where I took my car from, setting off to the south of Spain. Well, thank you very much again for joining me. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. Thank you. Bye now.